We're going to get started with the Portland Planning Sustainability Commission meeting of October 21st. Our agenda today is call to order, order of business, items of interest from the commissioners, director's report. Then we have a consent agenda item, proposed vacation of Southeast Gideon Street, Southeast Milwaukee Avenue. And then we have a green building policy update, which is a briefing. And then we'll have a 2035 West Quadrant Plan work session with Joe Zinder. And just as a reminder, we have, not today is the hearing on the comp plan, but the hearing is still open and you can submit written comments on the comp plan. So just as a reminder, you can continue to submit your comments.
Andre, question on the agenda.
Yes.
The West Quadrant item, we'll hear from Joe and Carl, but will there be open testimony today also?
There will not be any open testimony.
Okay. Fine.
There is public testimony that's been submitted today, up to through today for the work session from the public, and there's one here and there's one at Julie's desk if you did not get your copies and did not go online. So if you wish to review that, it's available. Just a quick kind of agenda for that work session will be, we'll have a review of the items in your packet from Joe, and then we'll have a height discussion, Old Town Chinatown discussion, a housing discussion, a river and environment discussion, Parks and Green Loop bikes discussion, parking discussion, and then we'll have a final discussion and wrap up from that standpoint.
Great.
And today is really about giving staff further direction, and we'll come back on December 9th to have a further work session and then a decision, if we can do that.
Sounds like a good process.
We will, so as much as we'll try to hold the discussion to the minimum and more about what are the additional issues you wish from what's been submitted so far, you wish staff to work on between now and December 9th, so they can clarify and get additional information.
Thank you.
Should we check to see? Mike, can you hear us? I'm thinking.
Mike.
Hey, Mike, can you hear everybody? Okay.
Nope. Nope. Yes, we don't know.
Yeah, online.
Yeah. You
Okay.
can hear. You cut out a little bit when we're hearing you. So let's just see how it goes.
Online is Mike Hauk, so he's on the phone just as
Right.
information.
Commissioner.
Well, earlier, I was talking to Julie and Joe, and they could hear me fine.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Great.
Can you hear him over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good. Items of interest from the commissioners? Anything? No. Director Sue?
Just a couple quick items. One, just to remind you that our meeting, it's not until November. November 18th is an extra meeting, and it'll start at 4 o'clock like we're doing today. So just to put that on your calendars, we'll send out a reminder beforehand. Second, I know you all remember the work we did on short-term rentals for single family. Since that time, as kind of a continuation of the discussion we had here around apartment buildings and multifamily and short-term rentals, the mayor put together a workforce, sort of a team of people to look at the issues, different stakeholders. They came up with some recommendations, and he's put together a proposal that he will take to council on November 19th. And so it's not coming back through here since we discussed it, and they're just taking it from that point on. If you have specific ideas that you want to do as an individual, feel free to, I know Karen had asked about whether or not we were going to be testifying as a group, and I think it's most appropriate at this point if you have any opinions to go there on your own in terms of favoring the proposal or not. And then lastly, I just wanted to congratulate Ms. Karen Gray and Mr. Andre Ba on their awards as Spirit of Portland winners, Spirit of Portland Award winners. Yay.
Great.
It's a real honor to get to work with both of you all the time, and we really appreciate the outstanding sort of dedicated work and time and creativity that you all put into the work on this commission. But I know that these awards are not just for your work that you're doing on this commission. It's the work that you do in the community, the work you do with kids throughout the community. So we're just really proud to get to work with you all the time. The awards are going to be on November 6th. November 6th, and we'll send out a reminder about it, and maybe we can some of us can be there to help celebrate. So
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
I would just say real quickly that it really is, I think it's cliche, but it really is about all of us here and the work we do. And I think Karen, your work that you do and everybody here, it's really, I'd like you to share in that award because it's, and also from Susan, Joe, and all the staff that works. I mean, they, in my opinion, they make us look good. So that's easy. Thank you. Consent agenda item, proposed vacation of Southeast Gideon Street east of Southeast Milwaukee.
Move adoption?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moved and seconded. Green building policy update. Elisa?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Coming in clearly, there we go. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elisa Kane, and I'm the Green Building and Development Manager for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And I'm very grateful to be here today to talk to you about Portland's green building policy for city-owned facilities. So these are some of the 500 buildings that the city owns and maintains, everything from little tiny pump stations, maintenance sheds, all the way to kind of some of our namesake buildings, including the Portland building. Like many of you, I get asked often about Portland's sustainability story and why Portland is so green and what we've been doing. And one of the reasons is that the city walks its talk. And this policy in particular maps to a lot of the different things that we do as a city to make environmental performance a priority for our buildings that we own and maintain, oftentimes for many hundreds of years. So I thought I'd put into context just where this policy has come from in relevant terms for today. So the city of Portland passed a green building policy for its own facilities in 2001, and that was the time of dial-up phones. But at the same time, Portland Development Commission and its functions as a housing development or affordable housing development option. And we've lost Mike, so
Sorry.
it's okay.
Sorry, Mike.
Sorry, Mike. All right, so back to 2001, so similarly, the PDC passed a policy for its investments. Over time, so the times that you see there, the policy has been updated, and right now we're in sort of yet now still again, update of the policy. And I usually call these a wash and wax of the policy, because like, technology, things in the green building industry change.
Go on.
Now he's back.
Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You got
All
cut
right.
off. Okay.
All right. So just very briefly, in less graphical form, 2001, the policy is based on LEED certification. In 2005, we strengthened that level of certification. This is for city facilities to LEED Gold, and PDC added LEED Silver. And at that time, in 2005, we added a fair amount of performance requirements. In 2009, we updated the city-owned facility policy and separated out PDC and housing. And fast forward to 2014, PDC is updating its policy alongside the owned city facility policy, and we'll be working in the longer term with the Affordable Housing or Portland Housing Bureau to update their policy. So really today I am just focusing on the policy for city-owned facilities. So there are a couple of basic kind of statutes or foundations for our policy. One, we do reference LEED as the go-to certification, although that I'll give you a little caveat to that later on. We look at things like adding renewables, managing stormwater through eco-roofs, and really a focus on operations and maintenance. So just to give you a little armchair tour of our green buildings, please chime in if you've worked on one of these, because it would be great to recognize you. So we have 11 LEED certified buildings in our city portfolio, which is really a terrific jump for us in the past 11 years. So Water Bureau Meter Shop, and these are not in any particular order, I'm not trying to favor one. And if I don't mention that they're anything but LEED Gold, all of them that you see up here are LEED Gold or better. So Meter Shop, some great things. This is where they test our water meters at the street level. They run multiple hundreds of gallons through water meters, make sure they're working properly. But they had been formerly in a basement, and they moved the employees out of the basement into this very well-lit shop that has solar, and it's a really much more pleasant place to work. And I think, it was one of our first LEED Gold buildings and really showed that you can pay attention to performance, but also to employee satisfaction. Next up, Water Bureau is, as if you've gone by their interstate kind of campus, you've seen that there are a lot of new buildings going up. So this is another LEED Gold building. It's not quite complete. This is a shop, stores, and warehouse. And also they're doing a maintenance building there. So it's been quite a build out that has been in the plan, been in the works for about 10 years. Also going to be LEED Gold, incorporating fair amount of solar, eco roofs, natural day lighting. Access to transportation is tremendous over here, and just really a good solid place for people to work. Next up, might have heard about it, it's the Columbia Boulevard Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's called the Columbia Building. Again, it's a facility services building, so people who work there, this is an office space for them. It also has become a center for people in the neighborhood to meet. They've opened up meeting rooms and made it sort of the front face of an otherwise sort of less glamorous building, which is the wastewater treatment plant. Now you're also seeing Fire Station 21. This is just an elevation drawing because I'll take a good picture of it when it's done, but this is just at the edge of the Hawthorne Bridge. Fire stations are a unique part of our portfolio because most of the work that you've seen in Fire Station was done through general obligation bonds that were issued before we had a green building policy. So a lot of the improvements to our fire stations would by any means would be considered green, but not all of them pursued LEED until later on. And so this one's going to be a LEED Gold facility. Also shows the kind of range and depth of buildings. This is a fairly small building in our portfolio, but it is going for LEED Gold. Again, another fire station. This was a retrofit. They also did seismic at the same time and also are paying attention to energy and water efficiency. These are like little mini homes because they're operated 24/7. They have a kitchen. They have bathrooms. They look like homes inside, with the exception of the bays for the equipment. So there's a lot to be done there, but they've done a great job making sure that they're going to still be standing and are very operational. So this is one of our newest LEED Gold buildings, the Emergency Coordination Center, a really terrific place, very unusual in terms of buildings. I mean, the amount of enforcements that have to go to make sure this building will still be around to serve us in a disaster or crisis mode is pretty tremendous. A lot of high security, a lot of data coming into this. So they had to mitigate some of those impacts, and certainly eco-roofs, addition of solar panels, really making it a pleasant place for people to work, and especially in times of crisis was also really important. This is one of my favorite ones. So this is our only LEED Silver project, but they get a free pass because this Charles Jordan Community Center, which is North Portland, it's by University Park, was underway for probably 8 years before the green building policy passed, and they did their best, even with an extended timeline of construction and renovation, to make it a LEED building. And they came in at LEED Silver, which is quite admirable when you didn't think about that 8 years earlier. LEED wasn't even really around when they started this building, and it's just an addition there. So our only LEED Platinum building is the East Portland Community Center swimming pool edition. Really terrific place. I don't know if any of you have been out there. It is a trip. It's like Water World, and I don't think LEED addresses this, but decibels, sound decibels, is pretty tremendous when you have about 100 screaming kids who are very happy in here. So the happiness factor is pretty tremendous. But also does a lot around saving water, because one of the things with pools is that you have to continually kind of clean and filter the water. So they used a filter system that saves upwards of 1 million gallons of water a year. So also help.
If you'd like, we could have our next meeting. We can have Howard.
Yeah.
That's how I'll enter the premises. I have a question
Make
for
sure
you.
the
Yes.
screaming
Really
kids are
care
there.
to see everyone in baby.
All of these are, all of these buildings are LEED, to be sure. Some of them lack what I call architectural excitement. But the question really is, are any or all fire stations community centers? Are they billed as community centers? Are they intended to be in any way?
The fire stations?
Yes.
So I think some of them have facilities that are open to the public. In fact, I think almost all of them have meeting rooms that you can rent out. They over the years, I think this is outside of the green building discussion in particular, but they have become known as resources where people can go in case of emergency, but also for community activities. That they're LEED, that they're friendly places to be is just I think a bonus to that conversation.
Yeah, well, like schools, they're really in the center of districts in an interesting way.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Yep. So now we're getting into our existing building stock. So Providence Park is actually owned by the city of Portland, and then we have a concession model where the Timbers and the Thorns actually run the place, and it went for LEED for existing building certification, and also another tremendous upgrade to the building. When you think about it, the building is not particularly enclosed. There's a fair amount of there's a modest amount of meeting space that happens to be down below, but they did a lot around lighting. They do a lot around operations and maintenance. So when you go there, you can recycle. They're very careful about the vendors that they use, careful about the cleaning. And that didn't save the Portland Thorns this season, though, as you can see by Alex Morgan's response to their loss. So next up is everybody's favorite City of Portland building. And believe it or not, this is a LEED for existing building, gold building. And this is a tremendous success. And I'd have to thank probably one person in particular for really bird dogging this and making sure that this happened. Her name's Wendy Gibson. She was a sustainable coordinator for facilities. And there's multiple different bureaus, there's even a county, and then there's tenants on the first floor, and they all had to come together to agree on certain maintenance practices, how they get to work, how they're gonna clean their spaces, what type of furniture they're gonna use. Then they had to look at even the use of hand dryers in the restrooms versus paper towels, and all that had to happen in order for it to become a LEED gold building. And it's a tremendous example that if you can get it done there, you can get it done anywhere. In addition, you can see that it has an eco roof, and that is part of our policy. I'll talk about that in a moment. It's been something that they've been testing over time to make sure it's working and to see what type of wildlife is attracted there. And it's one of our Portland's largest eco roofs, and it happens to be on the city building. Yep, it's a whole block. So speaking of eco roofs, one of our cornerstones of our green building policy is that it has a requirement for eco roofs. So when you're building new and or re-roofing, it is required that you put an eco roof on it. And because of that, for city facilities, there are over 60,000 square feet of eco roofs on our facilities. And these range from, like I mentioned, the Portland building to kind of more simple one out at the wastewater treatment plant. You'll also see eco roofs in Powell Butte, on some of the maintenance sheds at the park zones. And then there's some voluntary eco roofs that on some of the picnic shelters out in Kelly Point Park and otherwise. But we don't count that in the square footage, but they certainly look like eco roofs. Another component is, this is for our smaller, what we would call tenant improvement options, is the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, formerly OSD. When we were OSD, we developed some guidelines to help guide these types of improvements. And right now they're called high performance workspace. And they're modeled off of LEED, but they're a little bit more simple for us to implement. And we see spaces, anything from fitness rooms to Fire Station 1 using these guidelines. And they're still relevant today, and we updated them not too long ago. Okay, so I mentioned that we've been currently, what I would say, kind of polishing up the policy in 2014. We're about 75% there, and what happens when we do that is I convene multiple bureaus. So any of the bureaus that own or operate buildings, I ask bureau directors to assign a staff person to represent the bureau and walk through the policy with us. And we usually discuss it kind of on holistic terms and then very specifically, point by point, what we're asking. And this year we've added a few new things, and I did not intend that to happen, and this is going to keep happening. There we go. Okay, so that was pretty exciting, though. I have to admit it. I'm sorry Mike missed it. Yeah. So to understanding that there are a fair amount of buildings that we build that are small buildings. So these are maintenance sheds, these are like fire stations, they're places where, you know, there are locker rooms at Delta Park, that not all these buildings are great candidates for LEED. And we really wanted to recognize that. And until 2014, there really wasn't a great product on the market for small commercial. Enter Earth Advantage, which is a local nonprofit organization that puts out a multitude of certifications. Teresa is quite familiar with them and has worked with them over the years. They have something for residential. You see a lot of the new homes are using Earth Advantage as a third-party green building certification. They've developed one for small commercial. I have this picture of Rivermark. This is a community credit union on Hawthorne that was one of the first ones locally to use it. And we had Earth Advantage come in and explain their program, and it really seemed like it would be a good fit for smaller size buildings. Smaller for us means under 20,000 square feet. We still wanted to be mindful that over a certain amount of money, when the city's investing a certain amount of money, we are gonna look at kind of high performing buildings. We didn't want to roll back on anything, but we wanted to add a little flexibility. So we added this for buildings over 20,000 square feet and or with a construction budget of $5 million or less. So another thing we added, and Mike, I wish you could see this photo because this photo is actually of this taken from this building. So I work up on the 7th floor. It happens to be a kind of an active flight path, and this was a bird strike. And I literally was going to come here today and say, I think we've been able to mitigate some of this because we have these stickers put on the windows that help kind of reduce the reflections that the birds see. And oftentimes the birds see through 2 windows and think it's a clear path through. Just today I was sitting in a meeting and bam, bird strike. So it made me feel like, okay, we've added this bird-friendly design check sheet, specifically targeted it at priority areas. So areas that where we're building in conservation or environmental overlay districts and or the Central City Plan District, that we are gonna ask architects who are working with us to consider a series of bird-friendly design guidelines and implement them so that when we're having a meeting, we're not having friendlies visitors. And this, I know this picture is fairly graphic, but I saw it, and in fact, someone put up a little memorial to it, and that's what the little poster is. But to me, it doesn't seem right that we would have these buildings and that we would be causing undue harm to species that we want to live with. So I just want to recognize Roberta Jortner. She's in the audience here. Right, Roberta? Yep, there she is, for all her good work in bringing this and helping us implement this into the policy. A lot of the bird-friendly design guidelines are based on the Audubon Society's design guidelines, and in fact, Portland has a voluntary set of guidelines that we adopted here. So a couple other things that we're adding this time around, so this is the what's new and exciting. In the past, we've had a note about commissioning a building. And commissioning is a great standard practice of making sure that you get what you pay for in terms of your design and performance. Oftentimes, when we build buildings, we have great modeled energy use, we have great modeled water savings, and when you actually build the building, things happen. We all know this is to be true. You know, maybe the light doesn't go in the right place, or maybe the heat return is in a closet and it's not functioning properly. So commissioning allows people to come back, roll out the drawings compared to the as-built. So we've asked for enhanced commissioning, which LEED has a whole kind of criteria around. It just asks, it really asks people to go deeper. It also asks for a commissioning agent to be part of the design program early up, so that they're sitting in on early design decisions and can give feedback to the mechanical, to the electrical contractors as they're building. We're also adding a stronger hierarchy around how we remove structures. So one of the things that, we already have a recycling requirement for the city projects. It's 85% of job site recycling. We see some missed opportunities there just by recycling. We know that we can potentially either relocate buildings, we can deconstruct them, which is basically the opposite of construction. You remove building elements in the opposite order, then they go up. But it really helps to preserve the materials for the intent of reuse. Oftentimes these go back out into the community and go out in different ways. And some of our old buildings have wonderful lumber that we would now consider furniture grade as opposed to studs in the walls. So that's another thing. We've added some emphasis around that. We've also been asked, and this was done through council action, to include Salmon Safe certification for all bureaus. Right now, Parks has gone through Salmon Safe certification. It looks at everything from integrated pest management to types of plants that they will plant at parks. So now other capital improvement bureaus are going to be asked to do the same and follow Parks' lead We've had parks come in and talk about their Salmon Safe program, and they found that the people who are out there working in the field and on the jobs actually get a lot more satisfaction out of being mindful that they're not being exposed to chemicals unduly, and that they get a little more say in the types of plants that they use, so they can be a little more creative. So it has a couple of unintended but mutually beneficial benefits. Last up, WaterSense has become sort of the Energy Star of the water world, and we've added that as a criteria that when you select plumbing fixtures, you're selecting WaterSense, which means they've been tested to be the most efficient on the market. Right now, you can go into Home Depot, for example, and buy WaterSense. So it's not a hard reach for us, but it's important that we make sure we see that. Okay, so I know I don't have to spend a lot of time on why, but this green building policy maps and is a mirror to a lot of our other policies, everything from our climate action plan, so the section on sustainable city government, to our economic development strategy and our export strategy. A lot of the folks that have worked on our buildings go on to work for other municipalities, both in the US and beyond. So we know that this is part of our We Build Green City strategies. Then you have things like our plans around transportation, which is reflected in our green building policy, stormwater management, sustainable procurement, and the Portland plan. And all of that gets mapped into our green building policy and tries to reflect those, and in some ways just reinforces them, because those are the guiding star documents. Green building policy is a reinforcement strategy. So, we've updated the policy. This will be now our 4th time. It's not quite ready for prime time to share. I'm still getting feedback from the other bureaus. I plan to take it to City Council in early 2015. I hope to be able to provide you with an advance copy so you can take a look at it. I asked myself, this is my 2nd round of updates to the policy. I say, why do we do this? Because believe it or not, working with a bunch of different bureaus can be challenging to get us all on the same page and agree to spending our money the same way or having the same values, especially when we have one that's dedicated to transportation or stormwater. So it has to map to all of our, as a collective interest, all of our interests as a city. And this quote by Buckminster Fuller helped put it in perspective to me. And so the city owns and manages its buildings for a long time. I believe what we are building now will be around for another 100 years and hopefully beyond. So it's really important we get it right now for both our generations today and tomorrow. And with that, we get to celebrate it all. So with rainbows. Yes. I'm happy to answer any questions. So.
Questions? Catherine?
So first of all, so wonderful to see so many LEED Gold buildings on here, but I think it's time, and I'm sure you would agree, that it's time to see a lot more LEED Platinum and go further and beyond to that. And I know in your kind of outline memo here, you talked about Living Building Challenge or other, I know there's other ways to go about that, but could you talk or answer a little bit more about trying to push us further than just LEED Gold?
Yes, very good question. So we did add, and I didn't make a big point of it this year, but we did add as an option that buildings could choose LEED Gold and or Living Building Challenge. At one, we know that we have had some very deep and long conversations about building a living building for public use, for the city to use. So we know that it's possible, and I think we landed at leaving it at gold because LEED has changed enough that actually I've heard that getting to LEED Gold can be quite difficult and has gotten more difficult. And there was some concern that we weren't able to make the strong kind of economic case for LEED Platinum. Maybe we need to revisit that, but that going that extra step was going to be hard for the already very budget challenge projects. So,
and I guess I'd like to push back on that, and you may be exactly right, because I have to admit I'm not in the weeds on the newest LEED policies, but what we found certainly that was the past, but taking that leap and taking a really long-term look at it, the paybacks did start making so much more sense as soon as we went platinum and beyond versus just a gold or a silver. Yeah. And I'm sure you're looking at that. So I guess I just want to encourage you to actually push everybody to think bigger and be better.
Very good. Point taken and well received. Thank you.
And then the other point that I would add, and you kind of brought up the commissioning piece, but is there anything about actual reporting of how buildings are performing and sharing that information?
Excellent question. So you'll probably see me within about a month or so to talk about this. But one of the things that we are adding this year to city facility policies is that we are going to be reporting energy use on an annual basis using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we're going to make a public report. We already track that information at the city. We already track EUIs of our buildings. We're going to go the extra step for those that can be scored to report the Energy Star score and also report the EUI. One of the great things about what we've been doing at the city is that we have been trying to save energy for many, many years. So we actually fare quite well. You know, if I think about City Hall and Portland Building, both of them score in the high 80s in terms of Energy Star scores. We've also added about 600 kilowatts of solar of renewables. So that's a decent thing. But we do need to make public our energy use. It continues to hold us accountable. It also shows that, again, if a municipality can do it, then the private sector with much different budgets and much different rationale can do it as well.
And would you take, sorry guys, one more last one. Would you take a look at that as far as other systems such as energy, such as water? And, you know, is there any kind of reporting back you can give on the eco roofs and the success you're having with those and treatment of stormwater? I guess, you know,
Yep.
just using the city as obviously an educational tool for, like you're saying, for the rest of the city.
And we are actually probably overdue for a status report. When in the past, over the years, I've been able to do a status report to kind of take the big step back and see how many eco roofs we are and what kind of benefits we're looking at. So I'm going to put that in my my to-do list. But you're right that it should be more well known, and we should actually receive the recognition that I think we deserve for it. So thank you for the nudge, Kat.
Yeah, thanks. Good work.
Karen?
I have a comment.
We'll
ahead,
go with
Mike.
yours first. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I heard about maybe 30% of the presentation. I guess, my understanding is this is the city of Portland building, correct? And I think what's really critical about that, or facilities, is that we really do need to lead by example. So I think this is fabulous, and it's great to hear about the friendly design and the eco-roof elements of this. And I guess they just say that I'm looking forward to the time where we can expand, you know, all of these things to the entire city. And as I said, I think it's critical that the city, you know, step up and really set a good example for what we want to see citywide. So it sounds great, based on what I've heard.
You only heard the good parts.
70% was really good.
You don't know what you missed, Mike.
Everybody been happy.
You want Karen to go first?
Go, Karen.
Uh,
ahead,
yeah,
Karen.
so I want to kind of echo what Mike said in that I always try to relate what we're talking about to something I understand. So being in education, the city stuff doesn't always make sense to me. But having just built a 140,000 square foot LEED Gold building, our brand new middle school, it is not easy. I mean, I don't know if everybody understands what that means. I didn't know what that meant to be LEED Gold, and they have actually made it much harder to get LEED Gold now. It isn't like, according to our architects and all the many, many people we've worked with, it isn't as easy as it used to be. And I appreciate LEED Platinum. I know the Port of Portland building is stunning and taken several tours of it. But it's not as easy as people think to go from gold to platinum. There were many more points you had to have. And frankly, the cost on the front end was not plausible by our community. And we had community meetings about what LEED certification they wanted their $40 million to go to. And we had good presentations on what that was. So I commend you for having 11 buildings and then having the controls where they do the reporting on the energy savings and then the commissioning and retro commissioning, being able to speak to those matters as far as energy savings. There's a reason why Portland is held up as a green city. And I think I'm just going to ramble because I don't really have any questions for you. I just want to say,
Great.
I kind of like a smidgen understand what it's like. Like, I'll just give you one example, then I'll stop talking. The gymnasium floor had to have wood that came from within a certain amount of miles of the school. And because we used a grade that our vendor kind of slipped in on us, which was not quite the grade that we had put forward, which we could not go back and change due to all kinds of reasons, we actually lost a point. We gained a point because we made them do something else that gave us back a point as their payment. But because we're pretty ruthless, but because this was so important to my community, we did that. And one other thing was our reader board has a little thingy that goes like this that actually generates the power for the reader board. So there are amazing things schools can do today in buildings, and I just want to say right on.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Good. Good
Howard?
news.
I want to, is this on? I want to echo what Catherine just said in terms of benchmarks. LEED are just 4 words that you put on a building at one point in time, but as Commissioner Lindbergh, who comes in and out of the room, can testify, plans were made 20 years ago to make LEED worth something. So I make the point, in fact, I want to emphasize Kat's point, that not only do we talk about it in terms of how it's going and how it's working, but that we make those 4 words worth something. Karen just articulated the steps you have to go through to get there. It should be worthwhile 10 years later in terms of saving, in terms of contribution back to the community, and we should know about it. So LEED doesn't become another acronym, as it probably is now, that nobody really quite gets in terms of what you have to do to get it.
Very good. Yep.
Great. Other comments? Margaret?
I'm going to guess it's on. So I see in here you have an eco-roof exemption for roofs less than 500 square feet. What's the justification behind that to provide that exemption?
Very good question. So right now, the stormwater management manual kicks in at 500 square feet and above. And one of the things we started seeing were literally 100, 200 square foot buildings with eco roofs that in the middle of parks that needed to be maintained. And it seemed a little bit like while beneficial and I think notable, we decided that, if you're not having to manage your stormwater, especially when you're in the middle of a park, that it didn't quite make sense to have that. So it was also too, if I were just to point out that eco roofs are a hard fought battle for our city policy, because it's not always a one size fits all solution. Some of the bureaus have had to struggle with it, and we wanted to give just a little more flexibility and I call it kind of the reality check, that it just makes more sense for our buildings. But good question. Thank you.
One more.
Okay.
So you said you were working with the Housing Authority, or did you say home?
Portland Housing Bureau.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So what are some of the policies that you're updating with regard to affordable housing?
So right now, what's been on the book since 2005, this was back when those functions were part of PDC, there were what were called greening affordable housing guidelines, and those still exist today. And they're not entirely out of date, but for the most part, they can be confusing, and they're not applied even-handedly. So what we're proposing is, once this policy gets passed, is working with the Housing Bureau and its community partners, which is very different than our bureau partners, to understand, one, what is feasible. We see a lot of great green affordable housing, everything from Bud Clark Commons down to Gray's Landing and a lot of places in between. So we know it can be done. We know we don't have to sacrifice affordability for green, and in fact, the two go well together, because we're looking at enhancing long-term livability and affordability. So the goal there is to work with the Housing Bureau and its partners to develop a policy that makes sense in current language and current times. I anticipate that would be a calendar year 2015 action.
Great. Other comments? Don?
Just a quick comment from me. I want to really compliment you, Alyssa, on this presentation, because I feel it'd be a great public education piece. Because a lot of times when people think about LEED buildings, they think about housing buildings or office buildings. Now more schools, institutional also. But I think the building list that you put up there is so diverse. The functions in those buildings, a shop, whoever thought of a shop as a LEED building? But all these different tenant behaviors and the different building types, it's important to communicate that LEED applies to all that, can apply in a pretty nice way. So
Good.
appreciate the presentation, and I just think it's a good public ed piece.
Okay, well, thank you again for having me. I'm happy to answer questions outside of this room at any time. Thank you.
Great. Other questions? I would just have one request. When you actually get done, is it possible you could stop by and give us a briefing before you head to council?
Sure, absolutely. Yep.
Great.
And I'd hoped by October we'd be close to done, but it turns out there's a little more work to do.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, we have 2035 West Quadrant Plan. This is a work session, so Joe Zender and Carl.
All right, this is fun. I get to introduce this and kind of remind us where we are, and then I'm going to hand it over to the chief planner to make a little presentation.
So just to be clear,
Role reversal going on. Yeah, yeah.
so we're going to follow the outline that I have in terms of timeline, and
We can
try
try.
to. Okay, so again, I'm going to remind commissioners that we're going to go through these topics, and really the idea here is to give them direction. If you really have to, if you want to get into a lot of detail on your concern or comments, make sure we get the main point, and then I would ask you that you get with staff afterwards and maybe over the phone or meet with them directly to get some of the detail out if you need to, so that we can get through everything tonight, because I'd like to make sure that they've got a good direction from all of us on things they need to work on before December 9th. Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, great. So thank you. I just wanted to make a few kind of comments, and then we'll get right into it. Carl Lyle, Senior Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Project Manager for the West Quadrant Plan. What are we doing? We're doing a work session on the West Quadrant Plan, so you've got the draft. This was given to you at a briefing back in August. It's the product of, you remember, about 16 to 18 months of work with a 30-person stakeholder advisory committee. Commissioner Schultz was on that committee, helped us with that. We then had a hearing, public hearing on September 9th, and you had quite a lot of comments. And then since then, you've received, and you all received electronically, I think 87 or so additional pieces of written testimony on various different bits and pieces of the plan. And you got those, and we actually have them in a binder over here too. If you have a desire to look something up, we can help with that. What we want to do now is kind of work through the issues that were identified by you at the hearing and then after the hearing in various emails and things. And there were a whole bunch of them. And so what we've done is prepared this kind of this little workbook here, which you should have. And what we try to do is in this, we listed sort of the questions that we'd heard, the issues that we'd heard identified by members of the commission. And then in cases where there's an amendment proposed, we've got that might address some of those issues. And then we provide some background and some information that might help sort of explain the situation in those cases. So you've got that. In addition to that, there's been ongoing communication with various different folks since we provided that about 2 weeks ago. And so you have today sort of this additional little packet of a few more things that we might want to change in addition to the agenda here. So there's some additional proposed revisions and ongoing discussions with our Bureau partners at Bureau of Environmental Services, for example, on the environmental river content. And there's one or two other fairly minor things in here as well. And then you have some of the slides printed out from Joe's presentation on the height context, which he's going to get into in just a second. So that's kind of what we've got to work with. I just also want to mention that we have invited staff from most of our Bureau partners who have been working with us on this, and they should be here. So we should have staff. I see we definitely have some staff from PDC, and we should have staff from BES, from Parks, from Bureau of Transportation, and from the Housing Bureau here. So if there are very specific kind of follow-up kind of questions, one of the things that you had asked for, I think, following the hearing was it'd be nice to have some expertise from those other bureaus in case there are specific things you wanted to ask about. So they should be here. So with that, I'm going to be quiet, and Joe's going to take us through a little height presentation, which is like the one in your packet, based on that, but with additional information and additional graphics. Oh, just one last thing is height is the only one we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation on because we really felt like we needed it, and there were the most sort of broad-ranging kind of background questions about it and sort of how does it work and all of that. The rest of it tonight, which hopefully we can at least get through a kind of a quick hit and identify what issues there still are, what things we still need to be working on before we come back in December and ask for a recommendation. We'll just use the packet and the materials to go through.
Okay, well, good afternoon, commissioners. I'm going to go through a brief presentation. This first part of it's going to hit on some of the points that are already in the memo that you received on height. So a little bit of repetition just to nail some of those points and also to open up the ability to ask questions if it wasn't clear in the memo. And then most of it is going to be some additional visuals we prepared to analyze the proposed height amendments that we have in the package so that we have given you additional information to talk through this on the basis of. So, the first of the foundational points is just a reminder that the central city is unique in terms of its role in the region, in terms of the aspirations that we have for it for density, both residential and employment. It's the center for big buildings. It's the center for employment for the region. It serves this unique role, and how we treat both density and height in the central city reflects that. Secondly, a foundational piece too is that, especially when we were talking about this earlier during testimony, everybody's summoning up their images of different cities that they appreciate because of the height, and that makes perfect sense. I do that too. And an important sort of unique factor of Portland to keep in mind is the block size. We have 200 by 200 foot blocks, which is a great blessing for our central city, especially in terms of walkability. That's part of the reason people come here and think it's such a fabulously walkable place because they feel like they're covering a lot of ground. Well, it's a short block. But the other advantage of that also is there's light and air built into the grid system. 40% of the land in our central city or in the west quadrant is in public right-of-way. So that's high for a central city. So it's distinct in that regard. Third, a foundational piece is I just wanted to remind people about the principles that over time we have used as a city to figure out how we wanted to arrange heights in the central city. And they're listed in the memo, but just real quickly, we give greater height where we're going for greater density. And you can, the math of that just is obvious. And mostly it's from the downtown office core tapering out to the edges of the central city. We control height and set heights so that we can preserve light and air around our public parks. So when you look at the detailed height regulations, we step down to the park blocks, we step down to the Chinese garden, we step down to the waterfront. Those are built into the code. We use height regulations to protect the character of our historic districts. In the districts, we set it low, and once again, we step down as we go to the edges of those districts. We set heights to protect public views, not private views, but public views. And you'll see a number of those represented in the diagrams I'm going to show you. But the classic is from the park to Mount Hood, and the heights in the central city are tapered to accommodate that. Fifth, we set heights to transition from the central city proper into the neighborhoods that are our first-tier neighborhoods around central city on both the east and the west side. And there's a principle that's in there that's a little bit hard for me to point to exactly where we've applied it, but regulation of height is used also as a way to shape the skyline. The last one of these, labeled new here, is not entirely new, but it is foundational to how we're treating height in the new central city plan, which is we're looking at it in exchange for public benefits. So most of the additional height that we're talking about, when we come back to you with specific code, we're looking for ways to link it to a bonus so that we're getting something in return for the flexibility. Okay, floor area ratio. This is density in the central city. It's calculated by the size of your site times the number that's on that map on the left, which is the floor area ratio, the FAR. And the principle is that you can build that much square feet on your site. And if you go with a smaller footprint where you're not covering the whole site, you go taller, and that's how you get the same amount of density on the same piece of land. So a smaller footprint goes taller. That's why we have the height flexibility built into our system. And this site's going to, this set of slides is illustrating that this flexibility where density and height work together creates different ways of developing a site. Most of our sites in the central city aren't full blocks, so you're dealing with sometimes quarter blocks, relatively small sites. So the more flexibility we have, we think gives you better chances to have a contextual, well-fitting building. And it allows you to do things like not develop part of the site, preserve part of the site, still get the density you're after in the central city. You could preserve it to preserve a historic structure or a smaller structure. You could preserve it to create open space. So all these things work together, and when we talk about flexibility later on, that's the flexibility we're shooting for. Height and FAR is not the only way that we control the urban form of the central city. A big part of it is through our design regulations. And we heard about this in the testimony, the critical importance of that first 30 feet, because that's where pedestrians are. The life of the city, how we perceive it mostly, is down at that level. So we have specific design guidelines in the central city to promote that kind of practice. And we have required design review in the central city, discretionary design review, so that the design review commission and design review staff are actually involved in applying these guidelines to the buildings. And it goes beyond just the buildings themselves. It also applies to the public right-of-way, how the sidewalk's designed through a set of guidelines. Another foundational piece is, you heard in your testimony how the height of a building is related to the technology, the type of construction. And when we set these height limits, one of the things that we've noticed is that we could set them sort of for a design purpose or for a math purpose, but you need to keep in mind that a typical kind of construction where it's a concrete base, a concrete podium, and frame construction, wood or metal, but frame construction above, is about a 75-foot building. That's the technology and the fire code that sort of leads you to an economic sweet spot with that kind of building, and then there's a certain price per square foot. And Catherine, I'm looking for corrections on this. The second sort of technology that's applied is this thing called the slab building. And the slab building basically is a concrete frame all the way up, and it tends to have a bigger floor plate. So this is for office buildings often, but you see it in residential, and it allows you to have a bigger floor plate, cover more space, but has a different price point per square foot, which drives you to want to use it in situations where you can get more development on the site, and that's often associated with more height, right? The third one is the tower building, and we've seen those, especially in South Waterfront, but we have them and in the commercial buildings in the business core. Here, this can be construction, or it can be concrete, or it can be steel, but once again, it's a smaller floor plate typically, and different sort of cost per square foot. So as you're looking at these height limits, a different kind of building and a different economics applies as you go around. The last of the foundational piece is just to look back at the history of how we've developed height in the central city. Prior to 1988, all of the west quadrant, at least, other than the industrial zone, which we now call the Pearl, was 460 feet. So we came from a place back then where it was regulated by FAR, and we weren't so concerned about height, other than view corridors, sort of that smaller area. We had the idea of view corridors even then. In the 88 plan, and so that next generation of plan, we started to go to the shape that you see today, focusing on the downtown commercial core and tapering out as you go to the edges, and responding to the historic districts. So that's the precedent for, and really, we believe that, and one of the premises in the plan is that that general approach has served us very well. And so when you look at the changes that the plan came up with, it's pretty surgical, or they're specific, but still working in that kind of approach. And this slide is just to make the point that maximum height regulations are not destiny. It doesn't mean it's all going to get built that tall. And in our central city, it hasn't so much played out that way. That's why this combination of height and FAR for us is a flexibility move. And it doesn't mean that we're going to, when you especially see these height diagrams, the whole area never gets built out to that 100% coverage, at least in our experience in the central city we have today. Okay, so now I'm going to move into talking about the specific changes, okay? But just once again, to set the stage. And this is generalized. When you look at the specific maps, there's a lot more fine grain and changes in here, but that's a general pattern of floor area ratio, right? big in the commercial core, tapering out to the sort of second tier of the commercial core, and the residential neighborhoods, and then tapering down to the edges, with South Waterfront being its own sort of animal, but still building on those principles. Heights, you can see, sort of track that floor area ratio pretty well. You can see here up in the Old Town Chinatown part of this, where we had the idea from the 88 plan of the Red Crescent. So that's 460 feet going across the steel bridge over to the Lloyd Center over here, which is tall as well.
Could I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
Are you referring to the graphic in the memo that sent out that says existing height?
I'm talking from a version of that, Mike, and if we sent you the slides today, it's the one that's called existing heights, correct? Yeah. And so now I'm moving on to the next one, which is says proposed height
Oh, good.
limits.
Okay, I'm cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll make sure to make it easier to track.
See it there.
And so in proposed height limits, we're going to go into detail on this, but you see it's overall the same approach with some specific, as I said, changes for reasons that I'll explain next. And really our proposed height limit changes in the plan fall into these 6 specific moves. The first one I want to talk about is Old Town Chinatown, and this is striking a theme you're going to hear about repeatedly in this discussion. To provide flexibility for a part of town that is very precious in its cultural heritage, precious and distinctive in its historic building stock, and been a difficult place to see redevelopment happen for a very long time. There are some key redevelopment sites that we'd like to explore, adding more height to see if we can get more, use that as an incentive to get more to happen in the district. In the Old Town Chinatown proposal, the height changes that I'm going to discuss are intended to only be attainable by transferring height off of some of the lower historic buildings. So what does that do? It takes a site that is difficult to develop, maybe incents development, and takes some of the value that's created by that new development and transfers it to a historic existing property. So that kind of trade-off within the district,
And the historic.
within
building
the
would
Old
remain-
Town Chinatown
and the
district.
historic building would remain the same.
Okay, so. Yeah, I got a graphic coming up, Karen, and I'll do it again. But the idea is this, is that you take a building and you're going to allow it to go taller, but it's going to have to buy the rights from an adjacent property that isn't as tall to be able to get to that taller height. It's a private market transaction. If we do a transfer or if it's a bonus, it works where some money flows to the smaller building in return for the right for the bigger building to be built.
So the seller stays low.
Yeah.
And the buyer goes
And the
up.
seller stays low, and so it takes some of the economic pressure off of the seller to even consider going taller, and it adds to the economic life and viability of the building. And those smaller buildings are tough. They have seismic issues. They have a lot of issues. And so we're trying to bring economic value back to the marketplace of the neighborhood and specifically back to those buildings.
And I dare say continues the value, excuse me, Karen, of the ethnicity of it. By keeping that building where it is and what it is, it does a certain amount of that, doesn't it?
Well, the continued economic life of our historic districts is critical to having the historic districts be alive as well as just being preserved. Yeah.
People to go for it. What I worry about is, what if somebody doesn't agree? So what is the process? You don't have to stop now, 'cause
Okay.
you're on a roll. But I would, on the one hand, it's an incentive if you think it's an incentive and you want to go for it. If you don't think it's an incentive, what happens if it's not mutually agreed upon?
You don't go taller is what happens, but yeah, we should,
Party to party.
Yeah.
it's party to
I
party.
get
Outside the
that, but that
city.
also creates interesting relationships.
Oh,
Well, and it is done today, and it's working today in certain districts. So just kind
Is
of
it working in any district that looks just like this one?
Yeah, I guess you would see in southeast, northeast, FAR.
well, we do FAR transfers a lot, which is the density transfers. It's typically
Talking
where you
about
see this.
that you're talking about. examples of that.
You have sender sites and receiver sites. I believe that you could look at buildings in the Pearl where this has happened, and we're going to talk about the situation in the Pearl coming up. So, and they're private transactions, so I can't really tell you exactly how much it's used. It's not tracked that clearly.
And then, Maggie, you had a question?
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to clarify. So those buildings that would be selling their rights, they were already zoned for a taller height. They just haven't used that height limit.
You know,
correct?
yeah, some of these buildings are not 100-foot tall for sure.
Okay.
So yes,
Okay.
the baseline in the Old Town Chinatown is 100 feet. That's true. Okay. Oops, wrong way, of course. So, yeah, Gary.
A follow-up on that. So if the adjacent property transfers its height rights to a property that wants to grow taller, does that limitation then on the selling property, height limitation, exist in perpetuity?
Yeah, it becomes a covenant in the deed of the property. That's how
Okay.
the FAR transfers work. So, and as I said, they're private transactions and it goes in a covenant. So and with our new building permit system, we're going to be able to track those transactions better than we do today.
Joe,
Yeah,
sorry,
Chris.
If this is not the right moment for this question, feel free to defer it until the point where it is. But I think there are 3 blocks in this opportunity area, and the testimony from the community is they'd essentially like to lump all that on one block. And if you could explain what the pros and cons of the 1 block versus the 3 blocks are at some point, that would be great.
Absolutely, and that's actually coming up next. And so, so when you're looking at here, I've got existing, right? So the darker area is 460 feet now, all around 425, excuse me, thanks, Carl, around Chinatown, 100 feet in the heart of Chinatown. And what we're doing is 2 moves. One is lowering some of the heights on those perimeter blocks. Let me see, here along Gleason and then down 6th, and then taking a look at those 3 blocks there for the 150 feet, and then keeping the rest of the district in 100. So let me show you specifically the blocks we're talking about. And you're going to see this kind of illustration a lot in the presentation. So you can see 3rd Street, see 4th goes through the middle, block 33 is the parking lot, that's full
Wait,
block
wait, wait,
parking
wait,
lot.
Do that again. Where's 3rd? Oh, I see 3rd, okay,
3rd.
3rd. And there's
4th,
Davis?
right, Davis,
Okay.
Cooch,
It's a big parking lot.
5th,
Right,
PDC is right there.
right, okay, the big empty, that's that's a square block of
Right.
parking.
And that's right next to the Goldsmith blocks.
Right, yeah.
And so in our buildable lands inventory too, we sort of did lots that based on our calculation are underdeveloped and so might experience redevelopment in the coming years. So that's what the blue's just showing you, the universe of things in there that, could be redeveloped. Today, the height, is this right? Yes, today the heights, and this is just trying to show you planes that show you sort of the step up superimposed over the buildings, and it steps up from 75 to 100 to 350.
Yep.
And the 100 is the Old Town Chinatown. What we're proposing is 75 to 100 to 1 block depth of 175 to 250. So we're sort of tapering it all around and creating this incentive site in where it says 175. And in your correspondence, in your testimony, we received a letter from the Old Town Chinatown Association that put out an alternative proposal, which was 2 things. One is, what if it was 150 instead of 175? And then secondly, what if that height increase only takes place after you've updated the guidelines and updated the historic district? So what we're reflecting in our current proposal is that, and that's what we would move forward and want to explore. And our recommendation here really is to explore it with folks to see if we can make the case for it economically, and if we can show through the design guidelines that there is a design approach here that doesn't do damage.
Quick question,
Yes.
Joe. Again, I'm looking at an existing and a proposed with a red circle around 100 feet and 150 feet, slide number 16, is that right?
Yes. And then, Mike, we've gone past that to slide number 20, it looks like to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know, it's 20.
well, actually, it's not, but it says 20.
Maybe I'm missing something. What's
Yeah, it goes, we're at the one that says Old Town Chinatown proposed height limits, revised proposal 150.
He's gonna go 150 here.
And so, and the 150 is just reflecting that based on that testimony and sort of our consideration of it, we're looking for an incentive. We don't think 175 is like a magic number. 150 and the other provisions that the association's talking about work for us, and we want to explore it with folks. Yep. So next, what does explore it mean? Well, part of it is this.
Wait, could I ask another question? In the slide before, you go from 100 feet to a suggested 150 instead of 175. What about that band in the middle? Is that 100?
Yeah, so the way,
It continues 100 to the 150 instead of 175.
correct. And let me show you on the next slide, Howard. Let's see. So see, can you show the 3 blocks that are 150?
Yeah.
That's the block where the PDC building is to the Goldsmith
Yeah.
block with the parking lot in between.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about within the Chinatown district, increasing heights. And you see that the other side of 4th, I guess that is, in the district is 100, and we're keeping it 100.
Okay, along that edge, so that's a transition.
That's the
Right there,
transition.
Right on
That's
Fourth,
good.
really
Yeah.
on Fourth.
And so in these next illustrations are going to show you how we think it could work. But today, at 100 feet, that's what could get built, something like that. You could fill the site, you can go up 100 feet. And the way all of these diagrams work, we're on the existing height limits at 100, Mike, slide. The brown shade is with, there's FAR bonuses to get up to that height, and the lighter yellow shows you where they've used a bonus. So, and that's what that looks like, the 100-foot building on the street of 4th. So the kind of approach we're talking about is, what if you set a street wall on the 4th Street side and allow the other part of the block up on the transit mall to go taller? This is just a idea of how that might mass. This is not a building design, but you can start to see how if you step down in this way, you can maintain more of a street wall and sort of a street fabric with the historic neighborhood, and that's what we want to explore with folks.
Yeah, that really works from my perspective,
I
is
do
to
too.
put that height and density on the transit line.
Yeah,
That's a
what-
good-
And that's the approach. And you know, the other thing is that's not showing up in any of these diagrams, and it's the hard part of doing this. Those are not buildings. Those are just masses of blocks, right? When they are building, you're going to have windows and scaling features. And remember what I was saying about the design review criteria for the ground plane? That's when you really start to see whether or not a certain mass can fit in with the neighborhood that it's sitting in the midst of.
So the building on the left, on the west side of the street there, is that a 4 or 5 stories street level building and then step back to a higher height?
Exactly,
Okay.
Gary. That's what's going on there. See how it's taller along the transit mall, steps down as you come into 4th.
These are blended.
And so we could, through
What
our
does that look like on the other
where our
side?
regulations say, you know, you have to maintain a street wall, you have to step back so far. So we have not figured out what the right
transit wall.
proportions are, but that's the approach.
Okay.
And your stair steps in height occur in the middle of blocks on purpose, right, to get this transition effect?
Well, they did in this case because of the character of the place. This is important for us to, you know, 4th Avenue, we think is really important to the
That
character
building
of
on
the.
block 33 has different heights by design in the front and the back.
Well, if we design the regulations to be this way, yes. And that, what we're saying is this is sort of the approach that we would set with that, if people are tracking.
So-
Okay? Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I have a question about the building heights. So if we limit it at 150, is that going to make it be a bunch of ugly square buildings because of the economics of what needs to be built?
The, you have design review. But when you're, and we would have to, you know, one of the things that we would do when we explore this is show you, be able to say, are we cramming, what's the likelihood that if we cram all the density that's possible on that site into this envelope we're creating, it fills it up in a way that might not work? I mean, we can test that. I don't know how much density we leave on the table with this, but in terms of the step back that we've proposed here. But this is not architecture, but it could be a full block slab like that. It could be.
So, a question, and this is back to get that height, we're proposing they'd have to go through a bonus, correct? So
We're-
they'd have to take the height from an existing building, correct?
Yeah, we're looking at, it's probably a transfer, not a bonus,
transfer?
but yeah,
Yeah, okay, so
that's,
the transfer.
this is
So-
quid pro quo.
Okay, quid pro quo, so they're probably gonna take it from across the street.
It's somewhere in that district.
Somewhere in that district.
Right.
So as we think about that transfer, can we target the transfer very specifically so that we, and I guess this is to the question of the 3 blocks also, of where that transfer goes? So that we're just not randomly taking transfers and we're not randomly placing the transfers.
Well, so in this case, the good news is that the Chinatown district itself is very small. And the second kind of, it's not like you're pulling it from the Lloyd Center or something.
No, it's in district.
But the second thing is we could make it so it's contributing structures only, and that would be the intent, possibly.
That would definitely be the intent.
Yeah, go,
So we're kind of jumping ahead to the Old Town Chinatown tab in this little binder. So if you go to that, the first thing you'll see is that action item that all this discussion is about, and whether or not we should continue to look at more flexibility for height on those 3 blocks. And it's in here, and you can see it's RC4, and it says, to look at this as a tool to help encourage investment and development of those sites, or that site in particular. It just says to study the tool and see if we can develop something that would work. That's all that the plan is saying at this point. We don't know. We know that it's confusing. We're not sure exactly how it would work. We know that we only want it to come from, the right kind of buildings and the right district, and we know we need the right design guidelines to make it all kind of sing. This is just, do we even keep the height as an incentive on the table, or do we just take it off completely? That's a little bit the question that I think is out there, frankly, for the PSC. It's do we think that this height idea has some merit, as we heard from some of the testimony, although there's a lot of concern about it, or do we just take it off the table and not work on developing that zoning transfer tool that would come with some height? So that's, all we're saying is let's work it up. And this is just a little reminder on the process for what the West Quadrant Plan is. It's an interim step towards the new Central City Plan, right? So it goes to council after you're finished with it. It gets adopted by resolution only. Like, this looks pretty good, but there's no ordinance, there's no zoning changes. We have to bring all of that back with the code revisions, with all the details of how this transfer tool would work next year. So this is just, do we want to look at it or not?
Okay, I got Howard and Don need some, and Chris.
The site you're talking about has been empty and available for a long time. Does this height change the dynamics of that? Is that the reason for this?
Arguable, yes, that's the reasoning behind giving this a shot. And what basis do we have on which to believe that? Just the several proposals over the years have been serially made for the site, and they've all come in with this kind of thinking, like, can we get more here? I can't quite make it work. Just because, and you notice, like, there's other parts of the historic district where we're not taking this approach because, there, we understand that more entitlements might make it more feasible to develop, but we're just going to wait till it works, because eventually the market will get there and it'll pencil for somebody at some time. But we, in cooperation with the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood, it's languished so long, and they're looking for, the tipping point here, but in a way that's responsible to the character of the place, that this particular 3 blocks, but specifically Block 33. And Chris, if we tailored it back, it could just be Block 33. That could be, enough of this, and that's part of what we would explore by continuing this line of thinking. Yes.
All of which just wants me to reemphasize that if we could do the trades within a certain, a certain area, that protects the district as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Catherine?
Actually, Carl should probably explain this, but if I remember right, the reason for looking at the blocks in 3 and not just the 1 block was a way to get extra height on some existing historic buildings on either side of Block 33 that could easily then be transferred to 33. So it helps protect those even more and leave them in place. It gives them the extra height to then do the transfer. So it was kind of a double win, maybe you could say, potentially.
So it wraps around contributing buildings.
Right.
as well as development sites.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, just to your point, Carl, in just the discussion here today, so far, it seems that you're talking about just the 150 feet, whether there's kind of yes or no question for us.
Well,
I mean,
so-
that's what I'm.
So, right, so
understanding.
the proposed plan forwarded
Yeah.
by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee
Yeah.
does include this action item to keep
Yeah.
looking at that as a possible tool and develop the right transfer kind of provisions and bring that back,
Back, yeah.
next year as part of an
So
ordinance
I
package.
think what I'm hearing from some commissioners is there may be a little more direction they may want to provide
Sure.
around that policy that says the 150 feet may be okay, but here's how we want to
Yeah.
direct it.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
That's good.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
And because I think this is a good tool, and it provides flexibility to make good decisions. And I really like the concept of transition. I think that's going to build a more quality neighborhood. Hey, here's a question I have about this whole building heights thing. This is more overarching, but I'll ask it right now. Are we taking people that have rights to taller buildings and reducing their rights to tall buildings? And you know where I'm going, Joe. I'm thinking, are we proposing a taking here?
We are doing that. This is you remember how it's 3 and change on
Yeah.
5th, and we're taking it to
Yeah.
250 here, and we're doing it on Gleason. We do it in a number of places. We are, but there's still plenty of, you can still develop the same density.
With bonus provisions?
Well, not that, you won't get to the same height, but it's really within that envelope that we're saying you probably are still hitting the same
Okay.
FARs. And arguably, it's, I'm not an attorney, I don't want to state the opinion, but we do not believe it's susceptible
because of
to
the
a
FAR.
taking.
Okay.
There's still absolutely viable development that can happen in all the sites that we're touching.
Thanks.
But
Teresa,
wouldn't the
just-
buildings
just-
developed around them
Hold-
help their property as they held it?
Hold on. Teresa?
One thing, I'd just like to make sure that there's appropriate language in there so that our worst nightmare wouldn't happen, which would be parking lots that we're struggling with trade their rights to build. And so then we get tall buildings and parking lots next to
No,
them
and-
forever.
Thank you, and the way the language is written in there right now is that you'd only be able to transfer off of contributing historic buildings, so we're really targeting those historic structures in the district. And only 2 sites that are not historic, so you wouldn't be able to even transfer the height to something that is historic, so, I think that piece of it, I think, works.
So the good news is we just covered 2 of our items. So, you're making good progress.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's, spurring some thoughts, but anyway, so, there's a comment made in the draft, and I'm looking particularly under the piece around equity. What's in this, little binder thing? So, yeah, it helps to turn it on too, I had it off. Anyway, looking at the piece around equity, and it says the policies and actions in the proposed draft related to this historic district are somewhat different than those for other historic districts, precisely because it is different. So personally, I have a real affinity for this area, as a lot of my friends, my very close personal friends, are involved in the historic preservation of this, especially among the Chinese who live in Portland. So Joe had mentioned something about, and I may have heard you wrong, Joe, so I would like you to clarify, something about maybe a requirement to fix up some of the historic area before you start doing things to it, as one of the suggestions that you had received from the community. Because as we're sitting here listening to many people during that testifying time, we're really listening, we're really trying to hear them. There were a lot of concerns about what's going to happen to this area. And you mentioned something about the possibility of maybe picking up on a couple of those suggestions Did I hear you say you might work on that?
Oh, no, absolutely. So here's,
So tell me more,
and
tell us more about that.
so the request from, the proposal that was put forward in the testimony from the Neighborhood Association, and we've heard it from other sources as well, would work this way, that the idea of approaching this particular set of sites with maybe a little more height entitlement is okay to explore. But how do you really know? Because it's a risk, right? Especially when it's a district that's got so much, that's so precious. And that from the point of view of the association, if you get a revised set of design guidelines for the district in place, which we know we need and is elsewhere called for in the plan, because the design guidelines that are used in design review for this historic district are particular to this district, and they're way out of date. Right, so this district, we don't even have any. We just used the general central city one. So if you were to have design guidelines, historic design guidelines for Old Town Chinatown, then what you might design that's new infill development would have something to respond to. So people could judge whether or not they think it's adequate to do the job, to protect it. Second thing is, we need to take a look at the basis on which the historic district was created, and that's called the nomination. So you do the research into the properties, into the cultural history of the place, and update the nomination so that we can be sure, secondly, that the moves like we're talking, or we could be clear about if changes in allowed heights at the edge of this district would affect the nomination into historic status, and if it would and how it might, and if that's acceptable. So those two pieces the community's asked that we sort of settle those before we do any height increases. We're going to explore all of this over the course of the next year, but it's a separate, those are both big pieces of work that we're not intending on getting done in the Central City with our staff in that time frame. So it may be that we set up a future height increase here that is pending the city following through and completing those other two pieces of work. That's what the proposal is on the table, and we're open to that proposal. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really the logic of it is this, is that if the community has identified two things that we know need to be done that also would give everyone a greater reassurance that the right thing could happen as a result of the changes we have. So was a compelling argument.
So just to follow up on that, when you go to slide 22, which is the gate looking down on your proposed, that one right there. So in terms of the equity, the design at the 30 feet or something seems to me, and especially down Fourth there, it seems like a stark contrast at a walking level that you have a steel glass building and a Chinese gate and Chinese architecture on one side and the steel and glass reflecting it on the other. And so is there a design guidelines that would help
absolutely.
influence that we could put in there in terms of policy that would say that it needs to reflect, at least at the first 30 feet, something that looks like what's across the street?
No, it's going to, in exactly the direction it goes, we'll all work through, right? I don't want to prejudge what the answer is right now, because what's interesting is, it's the Goldsmith blocks is an old industrial building, really. It's a commercial building. And so there's a design answer to that very issue you're raising,
Well, I'm looking
Andre.
specifically at this, with thousands of people going by every day and looking down there for a visitor. It just looks like, to me, that we ought to have something that says, we thought about this view and we wanted to make sure that they built 150 feet, but part of that we recognized had value, and that view in that square at a pedestrian level, we recognized the value, the historic value, and not only the cultural value.
Well, I guess we agree. If I'm understanding, we agree. Like that's the intent, is that there's design guide, and as I said before, I'm showing you massing.
Yeah.
And I apologize, but I didn't.
No,
we're not designers, and so that is not a building. That is a stack of FAR, and it needs to be designed.
Before you take this away, let me make an observation. That probably could look like Grant Avenue in San Francisco if you took away all the storefront and everything. That's probably what Grand Avenue looks like. So my hope
Volume-wise.
is that you
Volume-wise,
would
yeah.
turn,
Just volume-wise.
yeah.
It's volume.
No, I'm talking about population and
Population.
activity and energy on the street.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And,
Gary, one more, and then we need to move on.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to follow up on Andre's question and make sure I'm understanding the situation correctly. So what prevents us from getting a glass block like that is design guidelines. And do I understand correctly that what's in place right now that would be applied to Old Town Chinatown would be the general design guidelines, but you need more district-specific guidelines in order to really have a clear influence.
It's an opportunity to do that, to really be specific to this district and its own kind of cultural, historic story, and get those reflected and enshrined in some guidelines that then the Historic Landmarks Commission can use in those design review processes. In fairness to our current process and the Historic Landmarks Commission, they're not going to let that building even today be, a shiny glass box, because it is in a historic district. It is going to go through historic design review, and they're going to use all of their expertise and knowledge and the Secretary's standards and other things to help inform what an appropriate historic relationship would be in the district, but they don't have the benefit of really district-specific, kind of community-supported guidelines that they could also use for this district.
So that's kind of the missing piece.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, Andre, to follow up on your question, is the development of district-specific guidelines, is that a recommendation that our commission should make for inclusion into the plan?
And it's in the plan now.
I hope so. It is in the.
It's in the plan now.
It's in the plan now
and the
to
one
develop those,
So it's
okay.
in the plan, and the inventory update, which is another very important piece of sort of rewriting the stories or researching the stories and trying to figure out what the significance of different properties and the boundaries and all of that, that's in there as well. What the change that we're proposing is we're making those concurrent now with this idea of looking at a transfer tool and any height possible.
If we come forward with a tool in height, you're going to see it in the context of guidelines and in the context of what we've learned from the nomination. So everybody sees the whole package, and that's in trying to be responsive to the concerns we heard.
Okay.
Okay. Okey doke. Bridgeheads, number 2. So once again, theme is about flexibility for constrained sites, and you're going to look at these in detail, and you all know these sites as well. And there's another principle at work in this one, and this was since the 72 plan and the 88 plan, there's been this desire to bring more activity to the waterfront and better connect the central city to the waterfront. And people talk about that sometimes metaphorically, but what we're trying to say here with this is, especially with the few sites that are left along NATO that happen to be these really troubled sites at bridgeheads, we could bring more economic activity, more density to the waterfront and allow the flexibility of some more height to be able to get the best quality buildings that we can along the waterfront, and to do that in a way that protects the historic district. So the 2 sites that I want to focus on for this bridgehead discussion are the Morrison Bridgehead and in Hawthorne. And so let's start with Morrison, everyone. So we're looking at the Morrison Bridgehead as it enters the west quadrant, and you can see the ramps that currently connect to NATO Parkway both ways, and the split V that goes down to those 2 streets. There's the redevelopment sites, and what's interesting here is you see those brown lines on either side. That's the Yamhill Historic District on the south side and the Skidmore Old Town Historic District on the north side. And Skidmore Old Town, Gary, actually has specific guidelines for its historic district. So that's one where we've already got that in place, and we're working to update those. So, but as you can also see that these pieces of land that are at the bridgehead have a lot of constraints. So what can we do to get the most out of those, or at least to open up the opportunity to get the most out of those sites? Today, here's our height limits, where it goes from 75, just really it carries the historic district frontage, and then boom, straight into the central core at 235 and 460. And what we're proposing is a step down that increases at this node on NATO up to 250 and makes a more a gradual climb back to the central business core at 460, keeps our historic districts on either side at their 75, and I think it actually lowers height, if I'm not mistaken, along the western edge of the Old Town District. It doesn't, okay, so, but it's still has the step there.
And the market, the public market
The public
proposals?
market is under the ramps, or within the ramps, under its current configuration. And if the public market gets built the way it's proposed, the way they're thinking about it, it would not need this height. And we would sort of be done with this
Would it be
discussion.
a combination of it and the height?
It
It leading up to a Grand Central Station number?
It could, and see, a little bit, what we're saying with this is, we're putting that option on the table as well. Because without that, you're not going to get that possibility. And
There was a letter in the testimony from Melvin Mark saying, well, wait a minute, we might want that height anyway, right? So.
yeah, and a little bit, we're all supportive of the public market, and it's going to happen. And this just opens up more sort of development opportunities that might work with that. And the other sort of reality check on this particular proposal is we're showing you here, Mike, and we're on the Morrison Bridgehead, the first of the height limit and shadow study slides. Once again, building massings, not architecture, but we wanted to show you at this height, and with the FAR you could get there sort of what the massing is, and also you can see that we've actually projected out the shadowing there. And this April 21st at 12 and 3 p.m., which you'll see, those are in our code. Those are the places where when we do shadow analysis, we look. So at noon, it doesn't cast a shadow on Waterfront Park at all. And it's very unlikely that that kind of configuration will get built if both of those ramps are still there like that. So the other sort of unsolved problem here, but we're creating flexibility, so it might be worth exploring, is whether or not, with the configuration of those ramps, and whether or not you still have both of them. And we know that they do provide an important transportation function, so this is not assuming they go away, but it's opening up, it's sort of opening up the flexibility and possibility of why one might want to look at that, and doing it in a way that brings more development down to the waterfront. So here is the 3 p.m. one, and you can see that at these kind of heights we're talking about on those sites, you start to cast some shadow onto Waterfront Park, but it's in the principle of if you go up, you got to get a smaller footprint so you can sort of see the scale of that.
Joe, are those two, I'll call them cloverleaf sites, are those public ownership?
They are correct.
Okay. So they're right away.
Yeah, they're county. It's a county. It's part of the bridge right away.
Okay.
And they are a critical link for the Central East Side. I don't want to
Yeah, for
hide that
trucks.
at all, especially for truck traffic trying to get on the freeway. This is the way you come across and get on NATO and go.
Joe, just a point of clarification, I heard the public market mentioned, and my recollection is some of the testimony, Ron Paul was quoted, I think that's their representative saying that for the public market, the height wasn't really an issue. So, is that correct?
Yeah, the public market has a proposal developed without assuming additional height.
But I mean, as Commissioner Smith mentioned, we did receive letters from the developer that they've partnered with saying they haven't designed the building, they have no idea the feasibility, they really want to keep the height on the table. So, yeah, so, they need to work that out, but I mean, I don't think their development partner wants to take that off the table yet.
Time out, yeah.
So
I just found oil on
a
the
question on the height. This is not a transferable height. This is,
Is this a transfer? This one we're not anticipating as a transfer.
We could link it with a bonus kind of type provision or some kind of standard for.
but this is just going to be a granted,
Well,
Actually, on all of these height increases, we're going to explore the viability of getting bonuses out of anything we add with this plan, getting public amenity out of this. And that's in part why we're doing the bonus study to see, what kind of value we might be creating with moves like this, and what might be reasonable and have a nexus to expect in terms of, a public benefit to be provided in exchange for height. We haven't figured that out yet, but at this point of our discussion, all of these kind of height proposals should be assumed to. We're going to explore would they work? And is the balance of public benefit or not worth making it a transfer?
But
or
they could
bonus?
not take the height, let's say if the public market didn't need the height, they could not transfer that height somewhere else.
No, these are, what we were trying to show you all is the height maximum, so and in the central city, those height maximums are not really adjustable. You can't get a variance, you can get a little variance, not a big variance, and so we're showing you a scenario of build out to the top of that limit.
Gary?
Yeah, the shadow study here, in a sense, represents kind of the best-case scenario, a month after the equinox and a month before the equinox on the other side. What does it look like when we're in the dark months and the sun is really low, like
It'll be
December,
more.
January? It
Yeah.
can be more shadow, but how much more?
We can run that. We just stuck with this because this is the way it's spelled out in the code. And there are some places we have provisions in the code now where tall buildings have to be able to demonstrate their impact on public spaces, public parks in terms of shading. And these are the dates that our current code requires them of. And so with the policy that we work from now, that fact that it's going to be greater at different times of year is true. But this is how we've set the bar so far.
I still think it would be interesting to see how much greater it would be, even though that legally apparently can't be used as part of the decision process.
We can change that. Go ahead, Catherine.
So I think I've expressed before, I'm certainly supportive of extra height at the bridgehead, but part of the idea that I'm intrigued by is the ability to be able to get housing near waterfront park, so we get more of a 24-hour park. And so looking at how to bonus housing to get that extra height, to me, is an intriguing piece to keep studying.
Second the motion, that's a good one.
Yeah,
That would be consistent with the purpose that we're doing this for, too. Right.
The question I have, and I'd like to see, is what's the value of height that we're talking about kind of globally as we look at the city? So value of height at the bridgeheads versus, that's waterfront property to me, and view property versus central city where you're looking at the next building next to you. And what's the value of those properties? And so you grant someone the height, how much value do you grant them in value?
So
And I don't know.
in our bonus study, we're going to try to get a sense of that. And we've tried to work on this issue in the past, and that's a difficult thing to price. But so part of the bonus study is to try to get a sense of the order of magnitude bonus value increase you get from height. And your observation is absolutely correct that it's a view is what you're buying, and in these places where that view is protected, it's probably very valuable. So we're going to find out. We're going to try to find out.
Well, I think that goes to Catherine's point. If you're talking about housing and you're going to extract value out of it for housing, you'd want to certainly extract the most value you could out of the highest value properties to get what you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Morrison Bridgehead. So we're going on to the Hawthorne Bridgehead. And Mike, this is in the slide package. So it's the same kind of look, right? So here's the Hawthorne Bridge coming into the west side. You can see the ramp configuration there. And here is the current height limits at 200 feet. And some of the buildings are actually taller. And there's a story to that. There's a few stories to that, actually. But, and then, yeah, it does. It looks, and then here's the sort of the base move that we're talking about. And even on all of these, everyone, we're just showing you general massings of these things. If there's a view corridor that cuts through here, this would be much more finely carved. And all these heights I've shown you are like that. And when you take a look at the buildings themselves, or the massing of them, again, you're used to looking at these diagrams. It's those two parcels, mostly right along the waterfront, that are of interest. And here, it's a similar kind of story. What's it going to make? What does it, bringing activity to the waterfront, that's our objective in part. And what is it going to take to make it worth the cost to rearrange those ramps as well, because that's a major intervention as well. So can we create more value here that may end us giving us a better both public and private part of a waterfront through a height adjustment at this bridgehead?
Howard?
Joe, several things are in play for me here. First of all, it seems like it's the core of the city's kind of civic involvement. Multnomah County, the city bureaus are all there. It's a bicycle nexus for a lot of that, which leads me to encourage workforce housing at that bridgehead as part of the strategy. Again, some specific encouragement. I don't know how much we can do around planning around that, but it seems if you're going to use height, that should be workforce related because it relates both to work and commute, everything.
Okay. I mean, that as part of the study, we're going to be able to show you the parameters of what works where, and that part of that whole exercise that we will bring back to you is getting the most out of whatever bonus system we design and where the places where we can actually show results from it. So we don't know yet, but.
Joe, maybe you could speak a little bit to the timeline. So a lot of these things we're coming up with and you're hearing about, so for the bonus system, for example, we're going to discuss it, we're going to begin to work on it. Where does that come back and when does that come back to this group so that they can look at, here's the dozen different options we're looking at, which ones are more important, which ones have more value from your perspectives, and when does that fit in to actual code adoption later down the road?
So I believe our schedule now has the full plan coming together with the code provisions by the end of 2015. So a year from now, basically, you're going to be looking at the specifics of this, and you're going to be looking at as much of that as we can get done.
Joe, a couple of questions. One, in this view, what are the heights of the proposed buildings here that you're showing at the bridgehead?
Can you go back to the?
They're less than 200, right?
Yeah, I don't think they don't make it to this 325
Because of the FAR.
because of the FAR, because both of these are constrained blocks, and neither one of these is a full block. This one is constrained because of the location of the ramp, and even if the ramp were relocated to make it a larger site, you still have some ramp confusion and limitations on that one site. And this is a 3/4 block site at best around the veritable quandary, because there's a historic building on the one corner of that site, so they're a little constrained. These are largely owned by Multnomah County, both of these as well. I mean, there's county bridges again, so it's a similar kind of a situation, and they have at many times in the past talked about, is there a way to put a new courthouse site there, or is there a way to free them up for development or something like that?
So Gary, these massings we're showing here do not get to the maximum height because of the amount of floor area that is on the site. So there's just not enough FAR on that site to fill up. So I guess you could if you made it really tiny and just extruded it up. But that's why this was, and that's why this is a difficult sort of thing to model, because it could be taller. The maximum height would allow it to be taller. But looking at sort of your, very conservative economic floor plates, it's something like that more.
Okay.
So remember
so it's unlikely
the two
to
work
rise
together.
to the 325 there.
Correct. It's
And then-
unlikely to be. It would be something.
So this one
Yeah.
over here is kind of an interesting example. This is, I think it's 100 Columbia, but it's a choice redevelopment site. It's almost a full block. It has the entry to the parking garage for Coin Center on it, but other than that, it's a development site. This shows a building actually trying to get to that 325, and it's skinny, right? So that would have to be a very nice hotel or a luxury condo tower or something to be able to be that thin and tall. Were it to be an office building or a courthouse or something, which is really probably much more likely in this location, it wouldn't be that tall, right? It would have a much larger floor plate and it wouldn't be able to get to that height.
And so when we use this sort of expression of we're using height coupled with FAR to create flexibility, it's for potential like that, but it could come out differently. But especially when you look at, this is sort of an edge of our commercial core, this part of town, and it's our civic district, a taller building in the mix, in the interior of that could be an opportunity.
Yeah, my other question is, in reading through the narrative and looking at the maps, it felt like there's a potential to create a pretty solid block of buildings on First and Second, substantially tall buildings, with the exception of that little 75-foot parcel at the edge of the historic district in the one block, Yam Hill Historic District. It's a radically different look and feel than what's there now, where that sector of town is pretty open to the sky, not well utilized, I appreciate, but it's very, very different. And is there a potential for that to be kind of just a more or less solid block of buildings along there, substantial height buildings?
I guess technically there would be that potential. The likelihood of it, but to get there, you would take probably a full block development site, and we don't have many of those on there other than the bridgeheads. That's in part why the bridgeheads popped out to us, is that's where the land is. You would have to extrude it up and go into a small floor plate like the example that Carl just described to really hit those heights probably.
Yeah. One of the thoughts I had looking at the Morrison Bridgehead is that I grew up in Minneapolis, and there was a building there, I think it was the Yamasaki building, which was a reverse suspension bridge type building. So the building was on a couple pillars and floated off the ground. You theoretically could do something like that over the Morrison Bridge and create a pretty massive structure there. And so I'm just kind of wondering about what the limits are on closing off that whole sector.
We would need to look at our development regulations for what would really be allowed to cross over a street like that, but I don't believe we would allow that, even in today's regulations. We have very stringent rules and requirements around even sky bridges, which is just a single, just a connection between bridges. Even those are very difficult to build. You have to have a very strong case for why that's absolutely necessary, and how it will be open to the public, and how it won't disrupt view corridors and light and air. So I don't think we're set up to allow even now that scenario.
Yeah, don't forget these work in couple with design review guidelines, and there's other things that would probably make that impossible, and the Skybridge regulations are in that. Okay? So we're halfway through the first item, but the rest of these are relatively straightforward. So now we're looking at South Transit Mall. Once again, and here the principle is, we've just made this major investment into the infrastructure of light rail transit on the mall down to PSU and extending it out to Milwaukee, and extending some of the development activity and energy and scale that we have in the rest of the transit mall south. And this was pretty uniformly supported, or it had a good deal of support on this our steering committee. And actually, they went to the extent of saying, we did not propose in this draft increasing the floor area ratio down here, so we're increasing height but not density. But they were saying we should explore that. The reason we went more conservatively with it is out of a concern for transit capacity at this end, or transportation capacity. And so there's a big nut there to solve in terms of just traffic that would go with more FAR that we didn't think was the prize right now. Might be something that we come back at in a future time. The place that we're talking about is shown in the circles, and you've got two things going on here. One is the transit mall itself, and also I'm going to talk briefly about the Alphabet District that we're sitting in right now. And there's our site. And Carl, if you South Auditorium, sorry. Carl, if you want to show forth to get people oriented. That's shown where we is today. That's at the building where we're sitting in right now. So you see it's PSU over into South Auditorium District. The Halpern blocks, the parks behind us are shown in brown. There's our redevelopment sites. And so you're all pretty familiar with this from having so many meetings in this building, but it's the parking lots that string the street. And the one big notable site, especially in South Auditorium, is this University Place, and that's the old hotel there that's owned by PSU. And it's the last major redevelopment site sort of in that quadrant, and could be a major move. So at our current heights, that's kind of the massing that one might get. And then with the kind of height increases we're talking about, once again, with the floor area ratio and the height game playing together, you can see that you get some more taller buildings, smaller footprints, and I'd say the big move again is the changes that it could bring to the University Place site. And in the central city, the only place we're talking about increasing floor area ratio, I believe this is accurate, in the west quadrant, is University Place. Because today that's set at 2-to-1 FAR. And for a major site like that, especially connected to the university, we want to bump it up to what the rest of South Auditorium is, which is 4-to-1 today, base. Yeah.
So it looks like you bumped up the height limit right where all the food carts are sitting. I just see a lot of uproar about that. A lot of uproar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
It is true. There is actually, and I don't remember where it is, but maybe Catherine can help me find it, but there is an action item here in the plan recognizing the popularity of food carts and recognizing the fact that they pretty much all exist on redevelopment sites. And you know, we need them to redevelop to meet our plan goals ultimately. But we also love the food carts, right? So there's a strategy action in here saying, look at ways to accommodate those food carts as those sites redevelop. So there's probably a lot of other places we put them. We could put them in public right of way. We could put them in parks. We could create some incentives or figure out how to put them in new buildings. Maybe there's some interesting things that could happen in Waterfront Park, right? So I think there's a recognition that people are going to be sad to see them move around, but it'll probably take a while.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to?
That was for you, Mike, if you didn't hear that.
Page 44.
I just see with university students here, and even I'm sure BPS staff, there's not a lot of.
It's true.
There's not a lot of food options
But they
down
could go
here.
behind the building.
Behind the
There's a
building?
huge spot right there.
Okay.
There's a lot of other spots.
Okay.
So while we're on this slide,
Okay.
could you just quickly run your laser pointer at the Halperin parks and talk about shadow impacts?
Yeah, so let's see here. So let's get the names right. So this is
Lovejoy.
Lovejoy, and this one is Pettigrove,
Pettigrove.
and this is Forecourt Fountain in front of Keller, right? So those are the three big fountains.
The Origin and then the private
And then there's a
one.
little Origin Springs fountain right over here. And then this, not part of the original plan, but this extension that goes down to the art park, which is called Lee Kelly Sculpture Park, which is kind of part of that system as well. And we do have some action items about taking a look at the now very old, antiquated rules and sort of development guidelines that went along with the original urban renewal area of South Auditorium to make sure that we are bringing forward the right kind of protections in terms of shading for those parks and open spaces, and the right kind of requirements for, as this site in particular redevelops, the University Place site, how do we make a meaningful kind of connection both especially on 3rd, which doesn't connect today, to that sculpture park and actually to this green loop idea, if we can get that going.
So remember, one of the foundational principles for how we allocate height is to protect public open spaces. And so there's interesting history with this because this was all developed as an urban renewal area. So it has very particular controls that came with the development agreement, and some are reflected in our zoning. And when we do our height requirements, we would apply that same kind of protection to those public open spaces like we have elsewhere in the central city, or continue to do that. Okay, the last of the height changes in this. Okay, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
So there's two, and hey, Karen, this is where that slide was about the transfers. South Waterfront to Centennial Mill, that was South Waterfront is what we're talking about from Alver Mills north to River Place, I believe. Yeah, and then the other one is the South Pearl. And in the middle of the South Pearl, you can see it sort of shown there, is what we call the 13th Avenue Historic District. That's the character of 13th is actually a historic district. So here we're looking at increases in heights in these two locations from 175, they both are 175 today, to 250. In both, we're looking at that height only to be awarded in return for public amenity. In the case of the South Pearl District, and this is actually was strongly advocated by the Pearl District Association, who's concerned not just about preserving the historic buildings in there, but preserving the character buildings. And when by character building, you think about someplace like the Deschutes Brewery. That is an old commercial building, not necessarily certified historic, but important part of the character of the Pearl District. And so here we're looking at adding height to redevelopment sites, once again, as a transfer from donor sites, which could either be certified historic structures, or we'd have to invent a new category of these character buildings. But quick.
So they have to be historic to be contributed.
Well, that's something we have to sort through. You know, the straightforward way would be contributing to the historic district, but there's a lot of buildings that the Pearl District Association feels are important that aren't that. So is there a way to create another category? Yeah, so that's part of what we want to explore.
And there are character buildings that have been developed into very substantial structures that remain the same, but inside they're valuable places. And so they're going to stay there, but they ought to be playing in some way.
Right, no, well, totally, and so this opens that door, if you want to try to do that. You know, the market, if it keeps increasing, those are very valuable buildings, but I guess it could be someday something more built on that site is more valuable, and you might see it redeveloped. Extending the economic life and preserving some of those character buildings is what this move's about. And on the south on the Pearl waterfront, it's not about preserving the character buildings, it's about public amenity and open space in the waterfront itself. So as that plan, especially the Centennial Mill parts of this is really what that's focused on, develops, we will see what we can get in terms of a gracious and ample public realm along the waterfront. And the additional height may allow us the flexibility to get both an ambitious development program there and high-quality public open space, and we would once again design it to be a transfer or a bonus that works with that. So that's our proposed height changes, so thank you.
Last comments on height.
Really quick, this is not a question.
go ahead.
Joe and Carl, thank you very much for the prep memo and for the presentation tonight. They were both excellent.
Yeah, this really helps me.
Last direction, go ahead.
So I know you did a little bit of work on the idea of, well, what if we said 120 feet throughout the central city, and you know, what does that cost us? What do we give up or have to accommodate elsewhere?
Yeah, so Chris gave us a really interesting challenge, which was if you set the heights at the central city, just changed anything that isn't already taller, a redevelopment universe of sites to 100 feet. Like if you were saying we're going to set a new bar and it's going to be 100 feet, what's that do to the development capacity of the central city? And so it's a very complicated exercise that Carl and our GIS team sort of did, because it's complicated because there's a range of assumptions you got. So we also have a wide range of impacts. But our estimate is that for sure, the thing we would say for sure, if you once set it at 100, you would reduce the development capacity of the central city. And Carl, what were the numbers?
Well, so lots of caveats, and our tools for the model that we use, which is fairly sophisticated, is based on FAR, right? So in order to even begin to answer that question, we had to somehow then turn a height reduction scenario into assumptions about FAR attainment in new development. So we tried to do that, and really we looked primarily at what are sort of looking at buildings at or below 120 feet or between 75 and 120 feet, what sort of FARs built in the last few years in the central city, what sort of FARs were they attaining? And we saw that they generally were attaining somewhere between 4 and 6, sort of at the high end of FAR. There's some outliers that are lower and some that are higher for particular types of buildings. But generally, we saw that was kind of a range. So then we were able to say, okay, well then let's use that model that we have that uses FARs as they're allowed across the central city, and just say, okay, if there were a cap on that of 6, for example, because buildings couldn't reliably or often get above that if we had this kind of new typology, then we saw a shortfall really on the housing side of somewhere between 4 and 10,000 units over the course of the planning horizon. So a reduction, a pretty significant reduction in the amount of units that would be accommodated on that set of redevelopment parcels. So then a number of different things can happen as a result of that. And we have no idea how the market would respond. It's quite possible the market would invent some totally new prototype, and we don't know. But assuming that we would get the kind of stuff that we get now that's below 100 feet, we could see those units needing to go somewhere else, and they could go onto additional development sites, so new sites that we don't consider development sites in the central city today. Could become development sites. The economics could change enough that an older building can be taken down because you now need a new site and there's enough demand to do that. So that's a potential risk to historic structures, for example, and other character buildings and things. They could go other places, out into centers and corridors where there probably is enough capacity, but what does that sort of mean across the central city, to the central city and to the transportation networks and to the neighborhoods where those would go? And I don't have an answer really for that. That would take even more land because the size of the building would be even smaller there. Now we're talking about 3-4 story kind of buildings. And then the other thing that could happen in the central city is that the pressure on places where we really have employment development aspirations could increase. And that is of some concern as well, as we, one of the things that we're really interested in the southeast quadrant, which I don't know how much you've heard about yet, but you'll start to hear about it quite soon, is the real desire to maintain the ability of that district to be a functional incubator, economic development, kind of business-oriented jobs growth magnet kind of place, right? So the pressures on places like that could go up if we're kind of restraining development capacity for housing elsewhere in the central city. The other and final thing I'll say about it is that we also have some concerns about what it might do to affordability for housing over the long term in the central city. If we're sort of reducing the amount of units that could be built over the long term, what would that mean? And we don't know the answer, but I mean, I think there's some reasons to suspect that if supply is constrained in a certain area, that the inner neighborhoods and central city could escalate in terms of cost of housing more rapidly.
So if I could try and summarize that in a paragraph,
Yeah.
It would probably take a hit on our strategy to keep the central city as the vibrant economic core of the region, and we would see a shift in balance between the central city and the outlying neighborhoods and centers, or corridors and centers, right?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable scenario.
Thanks.
Other comments? Karen, Don, comments? Mike, do you have a comment? Yes. All right. Okay.
Oh, he's hearing the voices. Okay, Mike.
Listen to the voices.
Just a real
Follow them.
quick comment. I just have a concern about height on the water. I have an issue about shading and all that. So I would look to see alternatives around. Are there better sites than others? And especially with Multnomah County sites, there seems to be some public benefit there for maybe Multnomah County to redevelop their sites, but some of the other sites, I guess I'm not globally excited about high waterfront properties. The other side is the issue of public benefit. From my standpoint, housing is probably the biggest public benefit that we can, in terms of workforce housing, and how we describe workforce housing is very critical to how we look down the road. So I would like to see us set a priority list of how we describe public benefits and general benefits before we get to so the bonus discussion is directed about, if we're going to look at bonuses and benefits, what are the benefits that we want, whether they're environmental, housing, I don't know, but what are the benefits? And then lastly, in terms of transfers, I'm concerned that when you transfer, I'm okay with that, but I would not want to see a transfer mounted on then additional benefits, so that you don't get a transfer and then you have SDC benefits or some other housing benefits that could accumulate. So the historic building sells their right, and the historic building may take, what they do with the money is up to them, but I want to make sure that somehow we preserve SDCs and some of those other things for the historic buildings to really improve and redevelop their buildings to be useful parts of those districts. So that the transfer helps them, it just doesn't give them money, which is a private issue, and I know we're not involved, but the public benefits are still there for them, and it doesn't transfer over to the new building, and we have nothing left for them on the other areas. Yeah, go ahead.
And I had a little bit of a conversation with Carl about this today, and one thing that I'm kind of intrigued with is, and I think it's somewhat where you're going with that, is if you're going to get, for example, transferring from a historic resource, it's encouraging or maybe somehow even forcing that money to go back into whether it's unreinforced masonry buildings and helping them get seismically retrofitted, so we're actually saving that stock and helping that stock, or same thing, maybe perhaps it goes back into a housing pool, an affordable housing pool, and if they're an older building stock and how to help bring that building stock, maybe it's even more energy retrofits, and so a kind of a series of things which actually adds value back to the building that sent it or gave away that cash, but how you would encourage that cash to get reinvested.
Good job. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Awesome
Don,
result, really.
one more.
One last question on the building heights, and I think, Chris, this is more for you, because the question you asked, you wanted staff to look at kind of this 100-foot cap, and would there be capacity? And is that to really kind of think about a baseline in this situation? Because I know some people that appear to be against height state that we don't need the height to achieve growth objectives.
Exactly, that was the point of my
Is that
question.
kind of
is
the basis of your question?
That if we wanted to go for the low flat city, that there is a cost to that in other terms for our community.
Because it would spread out into other districts.
Right.
Okay, great, thanks.
I actually do have a comment.
Last comment, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I actually had a good conversation with Catherine. My concern being the wind, tunnel effect, and shades and so forth. And I understand there are ways to mitigate, especially for the wind, which is a major concern based on my experience in other cities. And my concern over height would be lessened if I knew there were actually ways we could require some of those mitigating approaches to address those issues. So that's, in the final analysis, that's something I'll be looking at. And then I still do have concerns about the step down at the river, but we'll have that conversation later. Anyway, I found the materials that Joe put together and the graphics have really helped me try to visualize what the impacts might be. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on, and thank you, Joe, for, I think,
Good job.
great information.
So I
Helped
think,
us a lot.
do we need to do more on Chinatown?
Well, that's a question.
Okay. So the next up, if we just wanted, we talked about Chinatown Heights. Any other issues in the Chinatown section that people want to raise? And our next topic is housing, and the housing overlaps with Chinatown too, I
Maybe
know as
that all
well.
goes together, Joe. And maybe you don't want to comment on this, but Old Town Chinatown has a fairly vocal, I think, district association that I hope is representative of what they both have and want to maintain there. And it's both, economic development and ethnic continuation, more of a district than of people living there. So are you comfortable with the information and what you're getting back from the people who live there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they're actually pretty engaged right now. In particular, I mean, it can be difficult in that district to sort of maintain the critical mass and energy level for the associations, but they've recently been kind of reincarnated as a community association with some broader business interests, and I think there's some real positive signs of that producing results. They've just been through a very active round of discussions with City Council and Portland Development Commission around the Old Town Chinatown Action Plan, which has resulted in some actions around new incentives for workforce housing and other things as well, and an investment of $57 million in the district over some 5 years, which is pretty significant. So there's a lot of energy and hope right now. It's actually fairly positive.
Well, and of course, I'm hearing grumbling as well around how slow and how kind of inactive it is, and how some people kind of lost interest and want to walk away from it. I hate to see that happen, because there are a lot of creative people there who I think should be retained in some form.
And that sense of urgency we share, and it's part of what's behind the recommendations you received. And, within that Old Town Chinatown community, it is a diverse set of voices too. And so that's one of the things that's reassuring to me about the chance of getting it right, because it's not, one point of view, and they, as an organization, sort of hold that, are working it out with each other as well and having those debates. So, okay.
Housing.
Okay, so for housing, let's see. Catherine, do you want to come up and talk about the numbers? So for housing, we had a few, if we turn to the sort of housing tab in here, and I think we have Kim White maybe from, or Kim McCarty's here from Housing Bureau if we need Kim. Or do you want to just come up, Kim? Well, you can just be ready. So for housing, there were a few things, and there are some, actually quite a few amendments proposed in here in the table at the beginning of the housing section. Those are a few different things. They're mainly kind of terminology, and we kind of went back to the comprehensive plan policies around housing and had quite a few discussions with Uma Krishnan, who's in that group and been working on all of that, and tried to get things to be a little bit more consistent with the same kind of language and terminology. So instead of saying things like housing balance, we changed that to be housing diversity, which is kind of the terminology used there. And we kind of lined up some of the income levels and categories to be more consistent with what's in the comprehensive plan as well. So a lot of that, and then because we made those changes in one place, we had to make it in a whole bunch of places. So that's why you see quite a few things in this chart. So that's kind of the main thing. The other, and then there's a series of background information pieces, particularly on Old Town Chinatown, and about sort of explaining the sort of lack of diversity in housing income levels in that district sort of today. So that's in there. And then we provided this table, this sort of pull-out table here. This is just showing you, and it doesn't include the amendments proposed in that table I was just talking about, but this kind of big thing was our response to, we heard a number of people testify that they didn't see anything about affordable housing in the plan, and we actually feel like there's quite a bit in here, but we know that the plan is a little bit confusing and difficult to find things in sometimes. So what happened was, because the district sections, we found ourselves when writing those housing sections for example, the Pearl District or for Goose Hollow, we found ourselves writing the same thing that we had already written for a bunch of other districts. So we actually pulled most of that housing discussion and policy language out and put it in the front here in the Central City-wide section. So that was part of the confusion about why aren't there policies about affordable housing? Why are we only talking about student housing in the University District, for example? Well, it's because in the University District we had that little extra something to say that we didn't necessarily want to say everywhere about student housing. But the affordable housing desire, it does apply everywhere and is in the Central City section. So this helps you find kind of where those housing policies are throughout the plan. So that's what that was about. And then we had a specific request to look at what would numerical kind of targets around affordable housing look like by subdistricts. And so we included some tables on that. They're just scenarios that sort of say, if we were to keep if we were to meet the Portland plan target of 15% affordable housing, what would that look like in the Central City? But then realizing that's actually probably too low, much too low for the Central City, because today we know that 30% of the housing in Central City is affordable. So what if we were to keep that 31%, sorry, and sort of project that out? What would that mean? Perhaps those are sort of bookends for if you wanted to look at numbers that could be representative of targets. We actually don't really think we want to put these targets or numbers in the plan at this point. They provide kind of context for what they might look like. Instead, we would say, because there's a lot we don't know about sort of resources available in different districts and and sort of the changing markets and all sorts of different things, that we feel like going to these numbers in this really long-range plan was going too far. But perhaps over the next year, we could work with the Housing Bureau to develop some kind of a percentage target, or at least bring back the conversation around what would a reasonable sort of central city percentage of new housing kind of target be, because we don't really have policy direction on that yet. So that's kind of what's in there for housing. I brought Catherine up here because she wrote most of this stuff and understands where most of it is.
So explain that last part again. The percentages you don't want to put in are percent of low-income housing or just housing in general?
No, what I think, what I was trying to say, we thought might be going a little too far in terms of sort of magic ball numbers in a long-range plan like this, would be to put in for each district a numerical target of new affordable housing units. That's what I think, because that's kind of what this represents, these last tables that are in this section, to give you an idea of if we met a 15% or if we met a 31% of all new housing was affordable kind of goal, how much would that be in these different districts?
And
But
what is
yeah.
affordable? At 80% of median income?
Are you the 31%
N- n- it's. Do we
There's a
need-
guideline here. I mean, HUD has a guideline that you can use.
Kim, is it 60?
They redefined it. They redefined
We better come
affordable.
up here. Yeah.
In past plans, we've talked about affordability in terms of making it proportional to what you see as incomes of the people living in the city as a whole. So it's balancing it with what the need is.
We always hear 60%.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we've heard at this table.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
60%.
Yeah, well, 60 is a good start, but
Well,
30% of median is what HUD considers poverty.
They've redefined in the plan, if you go to HN2, households 0 to 30 are extremely low, 31 to 50 are very low,
There you go.
51 to 80 are low income, and then when you go 81 to 120 are moderate income. So
That's
that's
not
what
true
you
anymore.
proposed.
Does that change, Howard?
Yeah, I think it has.
So that 31% is incorporating up to moderate income? When you said 31% of the city's
Oh,
housing stock is
in,
affordable.
so that's an UMA question, and UMA's
Or
not
central
here,
city.
but
No, I believe it's 0 to 60, so 31% of the housing within Central City right now is in that 0 to 60 subsidized range.
Okay.
So what these two tables are is, so the Portland plan sets out citywide, we want to end up with 15% affordable.
Yeah, you have to talk to the
Yeah,
Talk to the mic.
sorry. I haven't done this
Use
before.
that mic on the speakerphone. I want them to be able to hear.
And so what these two tables are is the first one looks at if the new housing stock coming in, 15% of it was affordable, what would that look like? So that's that's 15% of new units. That's not kind of an end goal of 15%. So if you did that, you actually end up with 23% in the central city, which is higher than that 15% for the city. Does this make sense? Sorry.
But the definition of affordable includes moderate, according to this document.
No.
no, those, all right, so the action item, or is it HN2 you're talking about?
Yeah.
That's looking at, full diversity, right? So that's the aspiration to provide full spectrum of range of income opportunity, housing income
But that's
opportunities.
that's 0 to
That's
120%, and you're saying 23% of that.
No, this table, we need Uma Krishnan, who's not here, so we'll have to follow up on this, and that's fine. But this table is not going up to 120%.
No, this table, I
It's
believe,
either
is going to
60 or
60.
80, and we need to ask her.
I think we need a crisp definition, visual, crisp definition of affordable housing. What does that mean? What does that look like from the top to the bottom? I mean, when you use that term, it's just too ambiguous. Does that, well, I don't want to get into examples because I can give you endless of what I would call affordable or unaffordable.
Yeah, I think rather than, I think we need to come back with clarifying information. My belief, and because our housing analyst demographer prepared the table, and so I want to confirm what income levels are reflected in the percentages and the metrics that we're talking about. Within the policies of the plan, the affordable, I think, is typically referred to as 80% or less.
Less, yeah.
And then moderate is 80 to 120, and then market rates above 120. But we need to come back and confirm what you're looking at in that particular table.
And as it relates to the central city and what that means in terms of affordability.
Well, yeah, and I guess.
There's some relativity to that, but we can make our own.
Okay.
Right, and I just would encourage the commission to look at the policy language and make sure that the policy language is actually setting out in broad terms the intent of what we kind of want in the central city over time, rather than diving into, in this sub-district, we want 12 units of this at this level and 17 of this other one, because that's not really the place for this long-range policy document, really. So let's get the policy language right, and we will follow up on the numbers and make sure we understand them, but.
I want to go to Maggie and then Kat, real quick.
Oh,
Maggie.
well, I mean, you kind of just addressed it. I would just say maybe an option, because there's so many definitions for affordable, is when we're looking at an appendix and definitions to say HUD defines it this way. This is the specific definition we're using relative to HUD or to new MFI guidelines, et cetera. Just to make that really clear for anyone.
We can do that.
Benchmark.
Catherine?
So I guess I'm going to jump in here because I think I'm the one that caused some of this confusion. And what I was, and we talked about this a little bit offline, kind of where this came from is a recognition that each of the quadrants within the West Quadrant, or each of the neighborhoods, I should say, within the West Quadrant, there's some specific goals. And like in Old Town Chinatown, it's kind of like, well, maybe there's too much of this housing, we need to target a different type of housing. Or in this neighborhood, there's not enough family housing, we need to target another different type of housing. So I was like, is there a metric that kind of says, in general, this is what we're seeing in today's stock, and we'd like to jigger it a little bit to get a little bit of a mix that's X versus Y. And then as we started talking through on more of this, I guess even bigger picture, it seems more important to start at the central city level, make sure that we feel like we're getting a good mix all around the central city, and then back into whether it's important to do it by neighborhood or not. And maybe that's getting too fine-grained, and so I apologize if I took you down a rabbit's hole. From what we were gathering is I was gathering from our discussion is there's issues with this metrics and trying to pull it together, and perhaps it's just something that we work towards in a policy statement of saying there's more work to be done here with the Housing Bureau to try to figure out how to look at it as central city-wide, and then if it's important to get down into a neighborhood policy.
That's right. That's right.
And other housing resources, because I agree, the Housing Bureau plays a role, but then Home Forward plays a role in these statistics.
So, Joe and I have had a exchange on where you have Chapter 4, Central City Policy Worldwide, and Goal F is to make the city a successful, dense neighborhood, and we talk about meeting human health needs, and then we talk about low-income affordability, housing diversity, and minimize displacement, and then below that, we talk about housing diversity, and we've changed the language to say attractive, dense, high-quality, affordable housing throughout the central city, a broad range of needs. And then in HN2, we go explore tools to support the development of housing across a range of affordability from extremely low income to moderate income. The policy there is my problem. And that is a problem because moderate income at 120% gets you, when you look at MFI, that's someone that can rent a property today in downtown, according to Zillow. That's market rate housing. You can go down, it's $1,500 a month. The MFI for a single bedroom for a single person would allow them to rent most of the properties downtown. That just doesn't seem to make sense to me, that we're at a moderate rate, we're promoting, and then we go down to HN3. So now we're saying a diverse from low income to moderate, and HN3 says develop incentives, zoning incentives, and that's targeted toward middle income. And my point is, for low income, we're going to develop tools, but for moderate, we're very specific about zoning tools. And I'm concerned about the moderate income getting the income levels of those individuals, because we also look at the demographics of Portland in the future. There's single individuals and elderly. That's kind of our massing of the population in the future. The market is responding from a public standpoint, a private standpoint, of building a lot of studio, single, one-bedroom apartments and condos downtown. That's what they're responding to, the demographics changing. We, with that policy, are saying, I mean, who, as a developer, yeah, I want to develop market rate housing that's subsidized for people that are at 120% that have zoning that help me do that. And we need to have a balance here somewhere that we can get to the low, what I would call workforce housing, in that 80 to 60, maybe 50% range. Because if you look at your statistics of wages downtown, that population is working poor and can't live downtown. And if you also look at the demographic or the racial profile of income levels, as you go up the income level of single male and females, diversity of that income level starts to diminish the higher you go, especially as you get to 120%. So by encouraging moderate income housing, we are, in my view, and this is just my view, we are essentially saying to the future kids that are 10 years old, 20 years, that'll be 30 years old in 20 years, that are in Karen's school system, David Douglas in Portland, majority of minorities, you cannot live in public housing downtown because your income level is not going to be high enough to get into that housing, because we've encouraged moderate income housing. And I know we're going to work on tools for low income housing, but we're specifically charging in HN3 zoning tools for moderate income. And we didn't put that same language for the low income. And that's the concern. So council's already said they're going to do moderate income housing. We're not going to change that. But for low income housing, for really what I'd call workforce housing, we need to be very specific about policy. From my viewpoint, how do we get policy that, and whether we do 0 to 30, I'm not sure, and I understand the concern there. But for people that work downtown that are single, how do we get them housing downtown that, talks to giving them really an opportunity to live in the city they want to work in?
That's where transit is.
That's where,
No.
well, there's another
Right.
thing called the Affordability Transit Index,
You don't need a car.
that if you live in East County, it costs you 47% of your income to live out
To get
there,
there.
and it
That's right.
costs you about 30% to live downtown. Same, housing and whatever, so you can save money by being in a transit-rich district of downtown as a low-income person, being a barista. I'm not gonna change I'm not, yeah, and we're not gonna change the type of jobs. I would love to say, we're gonna bring 100,000 jobs to everyone downtown. We certainly want policies for that economic development, but today, looking forward, we certainly want to accommodate people that are here and are going to be in the future, and when you look at history.
One of the things that might be helpful, just as a tool for, we'll go back and look at all the policies, but one of the things that might be helpful is some direction from the group around, with limited resources, you only have so many dollars to spend. Do you put any into the 80 to 120%? Do you put all of it into below 80%? Do you put it into both? That kind of decision, that's the kind of guidance I think we need from here. And then we'll go back and look at the tools. But I don't think we've had that discussion really right here in terms of, Is that, or is it more like economic development and environmental issues? So they're always in conflict, and both policies are always going to be in conflict, and they're both in the plan. And in a little way, I look at this as we want to do both. And what guidance I think we need from you is there any nuance you want to give that when it comes to splitting the dollar, one wins more than another? Because I think that's really what we're talking about is you've got limited resources, and are you going to look at wanting to, and then giving you the background where I think Howard was asking originally, which is just how much very low income housing already is here and how much what you're calling workforce housing is already here.
Yeah. Howard?
Gary's hand was
Oh,
up first.
I'm sorry, Gary.
Susan, thank you for articulating that question. And one of the things that I really took away from my prep work on this was the extreme concentration of subsidized housing in the central city and in some Old Town Chinatown and West End districts in particular. And that's not going to go away. Those places have 30 to 60-year requirements on subsidized housing. So I think the piece of data that will really help the conversation you're proposing is really to understand where subsidized housing fits into the mix along with the definitions of the other income levels. I think that would paint a more comprehensive picture. But I think the discussion that you're advocating for is exactly the discussion we need to have. How do you do that balance and between subsidized housing, very low income, moderate income, working income?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that I botched the terms in that last statement.
Maggie, did you have a comment? Howard, real quick.
You identified a problem, our limited resources, and I agree with that. I also want to define our partners in all this. I keep bringing up Home Forward because they are a very good partner and they play a huge role in all this. So does, if it's friendly, a PDC commission that understands and really supports that. Both of those are kind of in place right now, quite apart from writing any rules right now. People in both areas are there to kind of support that notion and get it going. So without naming names, it seems really appropriate that we be very aggressive about how and who we define as partners and how we define our policy around this, getting to it. I think I mean that.
And I would agree, Susan, we need to be more specific about what Gary talked about is that there is I don't know about an over-concentration, but a concentration of housing in certain areas that are very low income. But when you look at the broad city center, how do we take scarce resources, to your point, and allocate them, or at least put a priority to them as to what is the right mix of housing that we would want downtown to meet our goals? And I think when you talk about the diversity of the housing, the diversity of the population, diversity of jobs, and all of those economic factors, what is that right mix? And what's our priority for that mix in looking down the future of a city that is facing an affordability issue?
Just a quick point, and I guess kind of playing a little bit off of what you were bringing up here, Susan, is maybe there's is how to get the win-win and a way of looking at how to incentivize. Let's take a building retrofit, existing building stock. We bring it up, more energy efficient, retrofit it, so therefore we make it more green, reduce its carbon footprint, and somehow find ways to incentivize a certain type of housing stock that we're targeting for that neighborhood or that area. And so how do we look at that as that's the win-win? We get three, checks of the box right there and there, and how do we target those? And I think I brought this up before. I know that Los Angeles kind of looked at a study where they were taking existing building stocks to encourage housing to go into downtown Los Angeles and kind of re-looking at their building codes and how to reduce some of the impacts of upgrades that they were looking at, but yet still have safe buildings. And so they got a whole bunch of lofts built, basically, in the last boom. I don't think most of those lofts are affordable housing necessarily, but that being said, they did use it as a way to incentivize it through a look at how the building codes were affecting the cost of upgrading buildings. And I don't know all the triggers of that and how they did that in a safe manner. I'd have to study it, but.
No, but that's the kind of thing that you could propose as an additional policy.
Yeah.
So continue to think about those ideas, write them down, give them to Carl. At some point before you vote on this, I think we will probably have to have a little bit more direction or see if there's kind of agreement on, does the scale get tipped one way or another in terms of very affordable housing versus more market, edging towards market rate? And or do you want to give that guidance as the PSC or leave it to council? Because you can put both of those policies out there and say they're both important and let, future councils make the weighing decision.
Well, I would like to look at, and this is a number I'm struggling to get to, is just the volume of jobs that are going to be in that 80 to maybe 55% that equal one person. I mean, if you look at the demographics, we got 30% of our population going to sit in that demographic. So how many of those jobs are in central downtown Portland? And then how many people can we put in downtown Portland, that work downtown Portland, that meet that 30 to 80%, that don't get into 81 to 120%? And then how many people are below that are still in that 0 to 30%? And so if you then cast that out over the 25 years, what does the housing stock look like that you have then out there? Because I'm trying to say, can we house the people that work downtown? We know they're going to serve coffee and be at Target and everywhere else. Can we house them downtown? And we know their incomes. Can we do that and put them downtown, reduce their income, maybe give them a cost of living increase because they're not paying for a car, and at the same time maintain our very low income that we already have existing? And it's an allocation of resources, and then it's about what's the priority. Because if you have that, it seems to me, I don't know.
So,
Yes.
What I would like to propose, in addition to what Susan was talking about, that we bring back, is we put this discussion about the future needs and demand for housing in the central city, sort of in the context of what you all are also looking at in the comprehensive plan. So citywide, here it's picking up on what Andre was saying. Here's the income distribution that we can see in our new households are coming. The second data point, and what does that mean or not mean for the central city in that profile? The second point is, across that income profile, that median family income profile, which types of housing are either in short supply or harder to do in the central city? Because the only reason to do the incentive is that it isn't going to happen by any other means. And what we do know is clearly for your classic affordable housing, 60% medium and less, it always takes a subsidy, right? And even at this 80 to 120, where the market rates might show that if for a single person, it's kind of maybe market rate is close to the high end of that spectrum, that's fine. If you get into a 2 or 3 person household, it's probably fewer opportunities in the central city. Is that a target for us? So I want to give you all the complete profile. I feel like we haven't made that clear and set it in the context of the whole citywide expectation of housing needs. I'm not really sure that we're going to get to the point where we can make this housing policy resource allocation call on the back of the central city, because it's a citywide kind of debate when you think about it. Because our current housing policy really says try to build housing in areas that are opportunity rich, right? And the opportunity rich means neighborhoods or places that have, by the mix of stuff that's there and the mix of people that's there, more things that contribute to the likely success, the economic and sort of success of the households that you're housing there. So you don't have to create services. The services happen to be there, but they're probably more expensive places, and they probably means you're going to produce less housing with limited resources, but the overall impact on the household could be better. That's our policy now at the Housing Bureau of Housing. And you can see how that, especially with this idea of the transportation benefit of all this transit we've invested in, really plays out in the central city. So we need to try to give you all a sense of order of magnitude around that allocation and how it might affect the households that we think are coming. Because at the end of the day, it may be just that the point where we're off on the policies that we're promoting right now is that we're quoting an old sort of way of thinking, which was a belief that was documented at one time about how hard it is to get workforce housing in the city, period, but especially in the central city. But what Andre's pointing out is that we need a more nuanced understanding about what the heck it is we're talking about there. And it would be great to relate that into the households that we think are coming, what the economic condition of the future might be, because we're planning for 25 years. So I'll get with our housing people in the Housing Bureau and see if we can make some sense of that sets us up for policy decisions in the central city.
Don, you had a question?
Well, yeah, probably just a comment. I think it's important. It'd be great to have that clarity, Joe, in around this issue. But one of my observations is that the land values are so high in the central city, and a lot of times the purchase price of property starts to determine where affordable housing goes. So try as we may to do a great plan, those economics will still come into play. And I think we just need to stay aware of that.
Yeah. Well, and I would say the housing policy has been monolithic in a sense historically, but because of the downtown, and I think because of the next 20 years, it may need to bifurcate itself and have a policy that really focuses on the downtown and versus saying we're going to look opportunistic, because we are putting a lot of bonus height. If we enact all the height, we're putting a lot of availability, I don't know of housing, but of something to be built in the next 25 years. So we may need to think about downtown separately. I mean, it is connected to a full city, but it is downtown, and discussions of affordability and housing are usually focused around how well whether you can live downtown or not in a city. I mean, that's the starting point, and then you get to whether you can live outside of the downtown.
Or live in the city, period.
Or live in the city, period, so.
And you live near transit facilities.
Yeah, or
in the
transit
city.
facilities, so I think,
It's all expensive.
I think the whole corridors and centers, it's all
Yeah.
of those areas.
yeah.
Two more topics?
Environment, river.
One big one. So for an environment and river, we're going to bring up a whole shift of people at the table.
The night shift.
The
Turn
night
that
shift.
off. And we're just going to, in fact, I'm not even going to stay up here for this one.
You don't have to if you don't want to. It's up to you.
Listen to me. The words of the prophets are written on
Mike,
the
you still there? All right.
I kind of suspected you would be.
Just for this, right? Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Mindy Brooks with Planning and Sustainability, and along with Debbie Bischoff, we're going to cover the Environment and River amendments that you received. So just to know what we're talking from in your blue packet, we're talking about the pink tab pieces. And then also you received in your stack on the back of the agenda, there's additional amendments, additional proposed revisions there too. So we're going to be just really quickly summarizing what's in those pieces. I'm going to cover a lot of the river and environmental pieces. Debbie's going to talk a little bit about Ross Island, and then we can answer questions and have discussion about it. So just so you know, what we were responding to, and I think everybody knows this, but we've been responding to, there were comments from Commissioners Houck, Hansen, and Smith. We've also had ongoing work with the Bureau of Environmental Services and with Parks, and we do have staff here from both of those bureaus if you have questions for them. And also comments from Bob Salinger with the Audubon Society Portland, and comments from the Oregon Maritime Museum. So that's what we were responding to in our amendments in here. The specific amendments themselves have to do with the text, policy, actions, and the appendix that is in the blue packet. But we also put in here a table, like was done for housing, that summarized everything. There was confusion that we heard from people about where did the policies go, because we did some reorging of the policies in there. So there's a table in there where we summarized all of it together, trying to help people see where all the river environment policies are. Then the amendments themselves. So we bolstered policies and actions around flooding, stormwater, and heat island. We clarified policies, actions, and items regarding habitat and human use, the conflicts between those in the Willamette River. We added elements to the scope of the Willamette Greenway Plan update related to in-water and riparian protection, enhancement, and mitigation. We added BES and Bureau of Development Services as implementers where it was appropriate to have them as partners in the work. And we corrected some typos throughout the policies and so forth. There were a few typos in there. The other thing that's in this packet is we have some response memos that were to questions, but weren't necessarily amendments to the policies and actions within the plan. So there are a couple of memos that talk about the approach we're using to setting tree canopy and riverbank enhancement targets. And there's a memo summarizing a previous study regarding river transportation that are included in there. I'm going to hand it over to Debbie to talk about Ross Island really quick.
Good evening, Commissioners. Debbie Bischoff, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The changes and attachment 5 has a piece on Ross Island issues and potential solutions. And the changes that we're offered in your packet tonight explain the problem further by mentioning excessive noise by campers, boaters, and expanding the extent of the problem to include the Ross Island Lagoon. We also expand the area to petition for enforcement, including to include the banks along the Willamette River from downtown to Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. Acknowledge that the long-term management plan would cover the Ross Island Holgate Channel Oaks Bottom Complex, as it is called and covered, and that this multiple ownership plan would be developed when funds and staffing resources become available. We note in the changes that Portland Parks and Rec staff are developing a schedule for completion of natural resource management plans, and that this area is in that discussion. So they're trying to figure out the timetable by which they would be completing a natural resource management plan for this complex. And a new correction, thank you, Mike, from Commissioner Houck, that we missed was really describing the actual extent of the no-wake zone, which is not from the tip of Ross Island, but from it's upstream of Hardtack Island, from near the Oregon Yacht Club downstream on the Holgate Channel to the mouth of the Ross Island Lagoon and the entire lagoon as well. So those are the changes to the attachment 5 Ross Island piece.
So we'll just go ahead and field questions about any of that.
Don?
Debbie, is there a reason that Ross Island isn't in the central city?
Ross Island,
Is it too far south?
it is the northern part of our South Reach
Okay, so
planning.
yeah.
But we do have, and we added an action in here that we are going to still look at the impacts of Central City on Ross Island through the Central Reach, Central City planning.
Since they seem so connected. And
They are, I guess you have to draw a boundary, and the Ross Island area it relates also very well to the south.
Reach.
Okay.
Okay.
So you have to draw a line somewhere.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Mike? Mike?
No questions, huh, Mike?
No.
Two.
pleased also to see the appendices regarding methodologies for the urban tree canopy and habitat, not only enhancement but restoration. And I was pleased to see that restoration is defined in the staff response as actually increasing habitat on the river. Ross Island has been ignored throughout the. I keep hearing South Reach. The concern that I've raised is that the increased focus on access to the river will have very direct and some indirect impacts on the South Reach. And so there's no way we can move forward without addressing those issues. And Ross Island, the Ross Island archipelago, actually, the 4 islands, is just one piece of that incredibly important natural resource in the heart of the city that we need to address. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, we haven't. I'm pleased to see the addition of Appendix 5 regarding Ross Island, Holgate Channel, and Oaks Bottom. I'm concerned, of course, that when resources become available, we'll address those issues because, of course, that's say that I'm absolutely certain that Port of Portland will be donating their property to Portland Parks and Recreation, so there will only be 2 ownerships, and there's absolutely no reason why the city can't move forward with its property, and I would hope we can, in one way or another, engage Ross Island Sand and Gravel to produce a management plan for Oaks Bottom, Holgate Channel, and the Ross Island archipelago. And I just would ask. I know Michelle rows out there a lot. I don't know how many of the rest of you have been out on the Holgate Channel, the Willamette around Ross Island, but it's a mess. It is a disaster out there right now, and I don't think that it's all homeless people camping out there and making fires. There are a lot of folks who've just chosen to take their boats, their tents, or whatever, and they're allowed to do it and just trashing the environment. So I'm pleased to see you're starting to address that, and it's a real issue we have to get a handle on. And with that, I'll just stop and say that I'm pleased that a lot of the amendments that I see, including what came in here, really do get to some of the concerns we have about integrating protection of the river while we're trying to increase. And I've led hundreds and hundreds of trips on kayak, bicycle, hiking, and so forth. I'm totally behind activating and engaging the public with the river, but it's got to be done in a manner that doesn't trash the resource. Human access is fine, just so it is human assault on the river.
Okay. Other comments, questions about ownership around Ross Island and some of the actions? It notes in here that we're going to work around if a private property owners don't participate in some of the things Mike talked about and cleaning up and doing some of that. How are we going to, I guess, work around non-participants?
You mean Ross Island and ownership?
Well, it's not owned by the city as of yet.
Right.
And
The
so,
Ross Island.
yeah.
We're planning for that to happen.
Well, we're planning.
City owns 45 acres.
Yeah, we own.
Yeah. But if the property owner doesn't participate after that, how do we? I guess I'm just looking for.
Yeah.
Is there a policy to help encourage or?
I don't think there's a policy at this time. I mean, I think we would want to, as a city, encourage the private property owner to participate. Short of that, we certainly would want to do the right thing with the public property.
Public property, yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Parks, green loop, bikes.
Great job, Mr. Howe.
So
No
the,
one agrees with me, but I think you
Yeah,
did a
you're
good
on.
job.
Go ahead.
Everybody else shook their head no.
No, good comments, Mike.
so these last two items are pretty short. We might do parking first, maybe, because actually we need Mauricio Leclerc in case there's questions of PBOT. Why don't you come up here?
For parks.
And maybe there aren't questions, but so these two, they both involve PBOT a little bit. But parking, the question was really just, can we have some more background, I think, on sort of what's going on with parking in Skidmore and the surface parking lots. So we tried to provide that, and then a little bit of background on kind of why that's a particular issue in that district and some of the unique constraints to redevelopment there, and why some of those parking lots have continued to persist. And then we gave you a little context, kind of both sides, which we actually gave you earlier on the sort of debate about should we do something with sort of a stick approach there in addition to carrots or not. And our stakeholder advisory committee ended up, and many other groups working in Old Town have ended up pretty firmly on the side of no, we really don't want the taxes or the other kind of phasing out of the legal uses of those lots as parking lots, and we think that other things will work. So really, while there's an opening in the plan, I think in terms of developing a strategy to get those lots to develop, to come back to that at some point, if necessary, they're not called out explicitly. So that's kind of where we are on that. I don't know if there's additional conversation you all want to have on that. I guess the only other thing I would mention there is that in the testimony that we received at the hearing from really both sides of that issue, including the group of folks who have been kind of proponents of this notion of we should do something heavier-handed, they were all fine with what's in the plan right now and feel like it is an adequate kind of place for what they'd like to see happen. So I guess my recommendation would be I don't think we need to do any more with that language right now, but.
I agree with that. It's a peaceful approach. If you know what I mean. Yeah, I think the other approach was a little strong hand.
There's no peace, though.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, I guess I would agree it's a peaceful approach, and those parking lots have been peacefully sitting there for 40 years, and I want to know what's going to cause them not to be sitting there for 40 more. So what's different in this set of policies than existing policy that's actually going to trigger some action?
Well, so if we look at the attachment 1 in here, the very kind of last thing, almost last thing in the packet, you can see the action that is in here about developing and implementing an on and off street parking strategy for Old Town Chinatown that encourages redevelopment of surface parking lots, sharing of parking stalls, and maintains sufficient parking to meet the district's present and future needs. And that's something we're going to be working with both PDC and PBOT on. But there's some things in there that are different than what we kind of currently have. And one of the big ones is this recognition that in order to really allow those lots to develop without negatively impacting all the historic buildings that don't have any parking and sort of the existing users of parking resources, surface lots in the district, we really do need to figure out a shared kind of district parking resource for that district into the future. And that's something that PDC and PBOT are both working on now.
And would part of that be determining how much of that parking is actually used by the district versus being a reservoir for the rest of downtown?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Mauricio, I don't know if you want to speak to that. But
Yeah,
you should
well,
come up. Come up.
well-
You gotta get all the way up here. There you go.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
He was
It's
so
cold here, so I might as well use the
peaceful.
hot seat.
He is so
Yeah,
peaceful.
we'll be working. Tudon, yeah, Mauricio Leclerc, PBOT. As Carl was saying, we're starting now a citywide parking strategy, of which we'll be taking a very close and focused look at the central city. And within the central city, there are some special areas like Old Town, that need extra help. There are surface parking lots that have been sitting there for decades, and we need to find new tools. We have some leads, such as district parking, sharing our resources. We'll explore that. We have 74 pages of the zoning code dedicated to parking in the central city. We'll be taking a look at that and see if we can simplify, clarify, and also come up with new tools, new flexibility, so that we can incent development but also as best as we can maintain the accessibility and the desirability of the district. In Old Town, for many reasons, that needs extra help. Smaller sites, less height, high water table, existing parking space that needs to go somewhere. So we'll be working closely with BPS and PDC on that. So
I would agree that's a necessary condition. I'm not sure it's sufficient. My posture is going to remain impatient rather than peaceful.
yeah, we'll see where the process goes.
What's the timing
I'm
on that?
impatient about it too.
Yeah,
Chris.
the timing will be starting about now, fall, going.
About now?
Yes.
Tomorrow?
We
Just kidding, Mauricio.
What's going on?
about this. No, we'll form a committee this fall and get going on it. Yeah. The city, the citywide parking strategy is going, but we haven't started the Central City Committee yet.
Is there that's a great start. Are we looking at what's the overall timeline?
But, hopefully lining up with what Central City 2035, end of next year, something like that.
And will you be coming to us with kind of interim reports on how briefings? Or?
Yes, and as we are amending the zoning code, we have to come here, so we want your feedback and input and all that.
And I'm gonna one more question on that, and then I'll stop talking. Are you also looking at the not just the downtown, but I guess kind of more outlying areas such as Division and other areas are also struggling with their
Yes, so as part of the citywide parking strategy, we have another committee that's it's already met once, and it takes care of the centers and corridors, of the comp plan. So we are targeting, and actually we're collecting data now on utilization in the Hawthorns and Divisions and Hollywood Town Center and St. John's.
And I'm the commission's liaison to that committee.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Yay.
You can express your impatience. So.
Just a
Been warned.
kind of a policy question.
Yeah.
RC2.
Yeah.
You go to the next page, and it's a number of approaches have been suggested for
Right.
further. Allow and promote the sharing of existing and future parking stalls between multiple buildings and uses. So parking lots are excluded.
Yeah, so
I
today
mean,
in
so you can't,
in particular.
you wouldn't be able to, a existing parking lot cannot share its space.
Most of the existing old lots can, to whoever wants to pay for it. But a new lot or new space in a garage in a residential building has pretty limited, pretty serious restrictions on what they can do with that space. It really can only be used by residents of
So
that
how
building.
come we can't take away the existing sharing?
Well, it's the difference
So-
between commercial parking and accessory use, right?
Yeah.
No, well,
It's the legal status of the, right, so of the old surface parking lots that predate,
Yeah.
this is gonna be way out of,
Yeah.
my legal understanding, but they predate all of our rules about parking,
Okay.
essentially. So they are a classification called undedicated general parking.
Okay,
That goes away once those lots redevelop.
okay.
It's the most flexible kind of parking
Yeah.
because it was there before we had all the rules, and that's generally sort of how the sort of legal framework of things kind of work.
But we have a policy that allows out-of-district sharing, correct?
No, well, what do you mean? Out of? Oh, you're talking about, could we provide parking out of the district to help
No,
meet the?
but they can share, they can use, someone in the district or out of the district can say, I'm designating those parking spots on an existing lot. Can they do that?
On the old
Old
surface parking
surface,
lots that are
they-
undedicated general, they can pretty much do whatever they want.
Okay.
And that's a
But-
limited
but
supply,
a
and those are
building-
going away over
A
time.
building outside the district can come in and say, those are my parking spots.
It's whoever the owner or operator of those lots wants to lease them to.
Party to party, you can lease.
Right, there's
no, I'm-
there's no parking requirement in the central
In the
city.
central city.
So
yeah.
you can cut a deal to buy spaces if you think your tenants will use them, but it's for the benefit of your leases and ownerships. And so in Old Town, the market or the feedback we get is that there's a sense that it's hard to lease space for especially a new building without some sort of supply of parking. Now, that's the way it seems today. It may not always be that way, and it's not that way in other parts of town. And for your Class C space in Old Town, so the older stuff, there's a concern among some of those owners too that a loss of parking is going to affect their ability to keep those uses going. And so then you've affected the economic viability of some of the buildings, the very buildings you're trying to keep viable in a historic district. And that's part of what the work that PBOT and PDC are looking at in that Old Town Chinatown parking strategy. Like how do you, like what is there a sweet spot for meeting retail, commercial needs in the district and a more permanent way of providing for that that takes some of the market or some of the pressure off of these surface lots so that somebody could come in, redevelop the surface lot. Because often they're so small, the idea of providing parking on that surface lot as well as providing a building gets expensive and inefficient. But you could put a building there and you probably could lease it. But you know, you need a supply of parking, or we're trying to test that presumption. It may be that we just decide that we don't, but that's the exercise.
Okay, so to that point, then the adoption of the parking fee then helps build that strategy
A parking fee?
in Skidmore, then helps build that, meet that strategy of helping the retail and the existing.
What, I'm not sure what you mean by parking fee.
Well, SP2, adopt Skidmore parking fee to help pay for infill development and/or structured parking in the district.
Yeah, those are old. I mean, those are from way back in the process when the idea was first being introduced to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee,
Oh, okay.
and those were not included in the plan. They were just, we included that as context for, and the you know, as context for that sort of, that side of the story and what had been proposed.
Okay.
So those are all outdated.
Yeah.
Outdated, okay.
Yeah. I would also just note that there are some signs of hope on those surface parking lots right now, and there's at least 2 projects that are in various stages of the design review process right now on surface parking lots, right on NATO. So some of them, I think, are looking at using some of the new incentives that council just approved through the PDC Old Town Chinatown Action Plan. So there's some pretty exciting stuff happening.
And even though we would like them to be developed faster, we developed about half of them since the mid-90s. So there's a record that eventually the market comes around, eventually they develop a better use, and suddenly a parking space becomes an active building. Building with active uses.
Well, I was going to ask kind of a reverse question. What if a developer came in and did like 2 square blocks, bing? Could your parking plan for Old Town accommodate that? You know, if a developer, say, owned enough of a 2 square blocks to come in and make their own mark in the community in Old Town, could, if someone did that, the city accommodate the parking around it?
So Howard, if they propose that without their own on-site parking? Is
Yeah,
that your question?
yeah, they're saying, we're gonna do a Pearl District development, 4 buildings, 6 buildings. And we have a mixed, you know, all kinds of wonderful things around it, but what would that do to the radius around it if a major development in Old Town were to come along?
That would be a high-class problem to
I think
have.
that's my answer to my question.
Yeah, Mike's dog is
I'm appearing on Dumb Patrick.
weighing in on this.
What is that, stupid Patrick?
I mean, typically, we would expect a development of that scale to consider their parking needs and build parking that they would really need. I mean, I think that there could be an interesting conversation with PDC and
Also,
about
it could offer the
what they
opportunity
need.
to build underground, underneath the right of way, like, or like the brewery blocks. You can develop efficiencies by building
Well,
one
that's what I was
larger
thinking.
site.
If something enterprising were to come along right there, because it was precipitous, it was a good time to do it, it would in fact be a good time for them, hopefully, but also have an impact on everything around them in a project such as what happened in the Pearl District.
You know, the conversations we're having now about this idea of a shared garage, if they wanted to buy into that shared garage in some way, perhaps that, you know, that could work. You know, I don't know. That's
I'm
lot
not
of what
representing
ifs
their
there, but
interests,
yeah,
I'm just proposing that.
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas. Another one.
However, I'll be back to you with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the very last thing was pretty minor questions. There were a couple questions about park spikes, green loops here. One was, the parks question was really just about O'Brien Square, and I think there was really a suggestion that we just add a little bit more language there, and we did that. We did the same thing with a bicycle connection idea to Burnside, or Broadway Bridge from the Greenway, I think, from NATO Parkway, so that's kind of in there. And, you know, I think unless there's further questions about that, those didn't seem particularly controversial to us.
So, comment and a question.
Chris?
You know, appreciate you've reflected many of my comments in here. Very supportive of physical separation as a key definer for the loop. You know, something that's not in here but is in the plan is the idea of the hierarchy of streets downtown. You know, we've got a lot of streets we don't differentiate their function, and starting to do that, I think it's going to be a very positive step forward for cycling downtown. Question is just around timing of the green loop. When do we actually start to define some of those parameters that are still question marks? Will that happen in the central city plan that you bring to us, or will that be a further step?
You know, it's a great question, and I think we would like to have it in the final central city plan, at least on what those next steps are, because it probably isn't a zoning code thing for the most part. I mean, there may be a few little elements, but it's going to need to have its own kind of path forward, and I think we're pretty excited about trying to figure out what that is.
So that'll include, Carl, a more specific map that starts to put the alignment together?
I think it's both a mix of mapping and a whole lot of looking at how do we build a campaign to actually do this.
Oh, okay.
Because,
Promote it. Good.
so Joe and I,
Good.
we keep trying to set 4 hours to go, okay, how, you know, who are all the partners? Who cares about this? What, you know, because this is mostly a campaign. It's not to identify who are all the people who would benefit, from businesses to the residents, to the people who are living, to the potential new owner of the 2 blocks.
I'm
Yeah.
prepared to go
Dr.
forward
Howard.
Yeah.
as long as the city will cooperate. Sound like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Maybe we can
Sounds good.
just,
Kind of looks like it.
So if that's all the issues that we have briefed for you tonight, and I'd just like to do a little recap in anticipation of our next work session, if I could. And so at that work session in December, it's your deliberation and the recommendations on specific changes that you would want in the plan based on that. And we'll try to set that agenda up with based on what we've heard. But tonight, I think it's clear that there's deliberation that the commission wants to have amongst yourselves around the bridgehead heights in particular. We got guidance on the Old Town Chinatown heights, but clearly it was around fell into a more general bundle about things to consider as we design transfers and bonuses, which will come back to you later. But you know that that deliberation will be asking you all to give us the go-ahead to explore greater heights on those 3 blocks or some portion of those 3 blocks. And then on the second area where I know we need to bring back information to you beyond just your deliberation is housing. And we talked about that extensively. We need to frame that up better for you so that you're able to deliberate on and give us feedback on the housing policies in the plan. Other than that, if there's additional information we can provide that will shore up and help you get through the deliberation at the next work session, just let us know and we'll get that out to everybody. But
So, Joe, is the objective to deliberate and vote in December?
ideally, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Teresa?
I just want to thank you guys. You did a great job preparing the briefing and responding to our many questions, both ours and the public. So thank you.
I would want to echo that. I think this is a lot of issues and kind of a moving target, it seems a little bit from time to time. But I want to thank Susan, Carl, Joe. I know a lot of people sent you a lot of questions and kept sending you questions on this topic, and Catherine and everybody. And so responding to everybody and getting back with what you gave today, I think is great. It helped us kind of think about what are the important things we need to focus on as a commission, and that's important as we start to make a deliberation on the 9th.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think a lot of this is really set up by the good work that Catherine and her committee did.
Yeah,
I think
for
that
sure.
just formed an excellent foundation for all this decision making.
Yeah.
And the depth of some of us, Mike has in environmental, or Chris
Yeah.
has in certain areas that the rest of us rely on and are very appreciative of, truly. Truly, I think this is
there will be a quiz on FAR and height. If before you go out the
But you know,
door.
I was talking to my doctor. He doesn't think I'm 6 feet anymore. He thinks I shrunk.
That's FAR.
That's FAR.
I give
Your
I give up
FAR is
FAR.
reduced.
You're right.
And with that, I think we're adjourned.
See you,
You know
Mike.
what, do you want to hear about my doc?